Hi, welcome back to Storytime. Right before the stream, we got a follow by Hajime Dono. Thank you very much for the follow. So this is our final stream for The Man in the Brown Suit by Agatha Christie, which is her fourth novel that she wrote. We may run a little bit long because it looks like it's a little more than a fourth of the book, but we can do it. I believe in us. Anyways, let's go ahead and get started. We left it quite a cliffhanger of a part, so let's get down to it. Chapter 25. I came to myself slowly and painfully. I was conscious of an aching head and a shooting pain down my left arm when I tried to move, and everything seemed dreamlike and unreal. Nightmare visions floated before me. I felt myself falling again. Once Harry Rayburn's face seemed to come to me out of the mist. Almost I imagined it real. Then it floated away again, mocking me. Once I remember someone put a cup to my lips and I drank. A black face grinned into mine. A devil's face, I thought, and screamed out. Then dreams again. Long, troubled dreams in which I vainly sought Harry Rayburn to warn him. Warn him. What of? I did not know myself. But there was some danger, some great danger, and I alone could save him. Then darkness again, merciful darkness, and real sleep. Hey, Gogurt, how are you doing? I woke up. You just missed, the first paragraph. That is it. We just started. I woke at last myself again. The long nightmare was over. I remembered perfectly everything that had happened. My hurried flight from the hotel to meet Harry, the man in the shadows, and the last terrible moment of falling. By some miracle or other, I had not been killed. I was bruised and aching and very weak, but I was alive. But where was I? Moving my head with difficulty, I looked round me. I was in a small room with rough wooden walls. On them were huge skins of animals and various tusks of ivory. I was lying on a kind of rough couch, also covered with skins, and my left arm was bandaged up and felt stiff and uncomfortable. At first I thought I was alone, and then I saw a man's figure sitting between me and the light, his head turned toward the window. He was so still that he might have been carved out of wood. Something in the close-cropped black head was familiar to me, but I did not dare to let my imagination run astray. Suddenly he turned, and I caught my breath. It was Harry Rayburn. Harry Rayburn in the flesh. He rose and came over to me. "Feeling better?" he said a trifle awkwardly. I could not answer. The tears were running down my face. I was still weak, but I held his hand in both of mine. If only I could die like this, while he stood there looking down on me with that new look in his eyes. "Don't cry, Anne. Please don't cry. You're safe now. No one shall hurt you." He went and fetched a cup and brought it to me. "Drink some of this milk." I drank obediently. He went on talking in a low, coaxing tone, such as he might have used to a child. "Don't ask any questions now. Go to sleep again. You'll be stronger by and by." "I'll go away if you like." "No," I said urgently. No. "Then I'll stay." He brought a small stool over beside me and sat there. He laid his hand over mine and soothed and comforted. I dropped off to sleep once more. It must have been evening then, but when I awoke again, the sun was high in the heavens. I was alone in the hut, but as I stirred, an old native woman came running in. She was hideous as sin, but she grinned at me encouragingly. She brought me water in a basin and helped me wash my face and hands. Then she brought me a large bowl of soup, and I finished it, every drop. I asked her several questions, but she only grinned and nodded and chattered away in a guttural language, so I gathered she knew no English. Suddenly, she stood up and drew back respectfully as Harry Rayburn entered. He gave her a nod of dismissal, and she went out, leaving us alone. He smiled at me. Really better today? Yes, indeed, but very bewildered still. Where am I? You're on a small island on the Zambesi, about 4 miles up from the falls. Do my friends know I'm here? He shook his head. I must send word to them. That is as you like, of course, but if I were you, I should wait until you are a little stronger. Why? He did not answer immediately, so I went on. How long have I been here? His answer amazed me. Nearly a month. Oh, I cried. Oh, I must send word to Suzanne. She'll be terribly anxious. Who is Suzanne? Mrs. Blair. I was with her and Sir Eustace and Colonel Race at the hotel. But you knew that, surely? He shook his head. I know nothing except that I found you, caught in the fork of a tree, unconscious and with a badly wrenched arm. Where was the tree? Overhanging the ravine. But for your clothes catching on the branches, you would certainly have been dashed to pieces. I shuddered. Then a thought struck me. You say you didn't know I was there. What about the note, then? What note? The note you sent me asking me to meet you in the clearing. He stared at me. I sent no note. I felt myself flushing up to the roots of my hair. Fortunately, he did not seem to notice. How did you come to be on the spot in such a marvelous manner? I asked, in as nonchalant a manner as I could assume. And what are you doing in this part of the world, anyway? I live here, he said simply. On this island? Yes, I came here after the war. Sometimes I take parties from the hotel out in my boat, but it costs me very little to live, and mostly I do as I please. You live here all alone? I'm not much pining for society, I assure you, he said coldly. I'm sorry to have inflicted myself upon you, I retorted, but I seem to have had very little to say in the matter. To my surprise, his eyes twinkled a little. None whatever. I slung you across my shoulders like a sack of coal and carried you to my boat, quite like a primitive man of the Stone Age. But for a different reason, I put in. He flushed this time, a deep, burning flush. The tan of his face was suffused. But you haven't told me how you came to be wandering about so conveniently for me, I said hastily to cover his confusion. I couldn't sleep. I was restless, disturbed, had the feeling something was going to happen. In the end, I took the boat and came ashore and tramped down towards the falls. I was just at the head of the Palm Gully when I heard you scream. Why didn't you get help from the hotel instead of carting me all the way here? I asked. He flushed again. I suppose it seems an unpardonable liberty to you, but I don't think that even now you realize your danger. You think I should have informed your friends? Pretty friends who allowed you to be decoyed out to death. No, I swore to myself that I'd take better care of you than anyone else would. Not a soul comes to this island. I got old Batani, whom I cured of a fever once, to come and look after you. She's loyal. She'll never say a word. I could keep you here for months, and no one would ever know. I could keep you here for months, and no one would ever know. How some words please one. You did quite right, I said quietly, and I shall not send word to anyone. A day or so more anxiety doesn't make much difference. It's not as though they were my own people. They're only acquaintances, really. Even Suzanne. And whoever wrote that note must have known. A great deal. It's not the work of an outsider. I managed to mention the note this time without blushing at all. If you would be guided by me, he said, hesitating. I don't expect I shall be, I answered candidly, but there's no harm in hearing. Do you always do what you like, Miss Beddingfield? Usually, I said cautiously. To anyone else, I would have said always. I pity your husband, he said unexpectedly. You needn't, I retorted. I shouldn't dream of marrying anyone unless I was madly in love with him. And of course there is really nothing a woman enjoys so much as doing all the things she doesn't like for the sake of someone she does like. And the more self-willed she is, the more she likes it. I'm afraid I disagree with you. The boot is on the other leg as a rule." He spoke with a slight sneer. "Exactly," I cried eagerly. "And that's why there are so many unhappy marriages. It's all the fault of the men. Either they give way to their women, and then the women despise them, or else they are utterly selfish and insist on their own way, and never say thank you. Successful husbands make their wives do just what they want, and then make a frightful fuss of them for doing it. Women like to be mastered, but they hate not to have their sacrifices appreciated. On the other hand, men don't really appreciate women who are nice to them all the time. When I am married, I shall be a devil most of the time, but every now and then, when my husband least expects it, I shall show him what a perfect angel I can be." A reminder, this was written in 1925. Harry laughed outright. "What a cat-and-dog life you will lead." "Lovers always fight," I assured him, "because they don't understand each other, and by the time they do understand each other, they aren't in love anymore." "Does the reverse hold true? Are people who fight each other always lovers?" I don't know," I said momentarily, confused. He turned away to the fireplace. "Like some more soup?" he asked in a casual tone. "Oh, yes, please. I'm so hungry I could eat a hippopotamus." "That's good." He busied himself with a fire. I watched. "When I can get off the couch, I'll cook for you," I promised. "I don't suppose you know anything about cooking." "I can warm up things out of tins as well as you can," I retorted, pointing to a row of tins on the mantelpiece. "Touché," he said, laughing. His whole face changed when he laughed. It became boyish, happy, a different personality. I enjoyed my soup. As I ate it, I reminded him that he had not, after all, tendered me his advice. "Ah, yes, what I was going to say was this. If I were you, I would stay quietly perdu here until you are quite strong again. Your enemies will believe you dead. They will hardly be surprised at not finding the body. It would have been dashed to pieces on the rocks and carried down with the torrent." I shivered. "Once you are completely restored to health, you can journey quietly on to Beira and get a boat to take you back to England." "That would be very tame," I objected scornfully. "There speaks a foolish schoolgirl." "I'm not a foolish schoolgirl," I cried indignantly. "I'm a woman." He looked at me with an expression I could not fathom as I sat up flushed and excited. "God help me, so you are," he muttered and went abruptly out. My recovery was rapid. The two injuries I had sustained were a knock on the head and a badly wrenched arm. The latter was the most serious, and, to begin with, my rescuer had believed it to be actually broken. A careful examination, however, convinced him that it was not so, and although it was very painful, I was recovering the use of it quite quickly. It was a strange time. We were cut off from the world, alone together as Adam and Eve might have been, but with what a difference! Old Batani hovered about, counting no more than a dog might have done. I insisted on doing the cooking, or as much of it as I could manage with one arm. Harry was out a good part of the time, but we spent long hours together lying out in the shade of the palms, talking and quarreling, discussing everything under high heaven, quarreling and making it up again. We bickered a good deal, but there grew up between us a real and lasting comradeship, such as I could never have believed possible. That, and something else. The time was drawing near. I knew it when I should be well enough to leave, and I realized it with a heavy heart. Was he going to let me go? Without a word? Without a sign? He had fits of silence, long moody intervals, moments when he would spring up and tramp off by himself. One evening the crisis came. We had finished our simple meal and were sitting in the doorway of the hut. The sun was sinking. Hairpins were necessities of life, with which Harry had not been able to provide me, and my hair, straight and black, hung to my knees. I sat, my chin on my hands, lost in meditation. I felt rather than saw Harry looking at me. "You look like a witch, Anne." he said at last, and there was something in his voice that had never been there before. He reached out his hand and touched my hair. I shivered. Suddenly he sprang up with an oath. "You must leave here tomorrow, do you hear?" he cried. I can't bear any more. I'm only a man, after all. You must go, Anne. You must. You're not a fool. You know yourself that this can't go on." "I suppose not," I said slowly. "But it's been happy, hasn't it?" "Happy? It's been hell!" "As bad as that? What do you torment me for? Why are you mocking at me? Why do you say that, laughing into your hair?" "I wasn't laughing, and I'm not mocking. If you want me to go, I'll go. But if you want me to stay, I'll stay." "Not that," he cried vehemently. "Not that. Don't tempt me, Anne. Do you realize what I am? A criminal twice over. A man hunted down. They know me as Harry Parker. They think I've been away on a trek of country. But any day they may put two and two together, and then the blow will fall. You're so young, Anne, and so beautiful. With the kind of beauty that sends men mad. All the world's before you. Love, life, everything. Mine's behind me. Scorched, spoiled, with a taste of bitter ashes. If you don't want me, you know I want you. You know that I'd give my soul to pick you up in my arms and keep you here, hidden away from the world forever and ever. And you're tempting me, Anne. You with your long witch's hair and your eyes that are golden and brown and green and never stop laughing, even when your mouth is grave. But I'll save you from yourself and from me. You shall go tonight. You shall go to Beira." "I'm not going to Beira," I interrupted. "You are. You shall go to Beira if I have to take you there myself and throw you onto the boat. What do you think I'm made of? Do you think I'll wake up night after night fearing they've got you? One can't go on counting on miracles happening. You must go back to England, Anne, and marry and be happy, with a steady man who will give me a good home. Better that than utter disaster. And what are you? And what of you?" His face grew grim and set. "I've got my work ready to hand. Don't ask what it is. You can guess, I dare say. But I'll tell you this. I'll clear my name, or die in the attempt, and I'll choke the life out of the damned scoundrel who did his best to murder you the other night." "We must be fair," I said. "He didn't actually push me over. He'd no need to. His plan was cleverer than that. I went up to the path afterwards. Everything looked all right, but by the marks on the ground I saw that the stones which outlined the path had been taken up and put down again in a slightly different place. There are tall bushes growing just over the edge. He'd balanced the outside stones on them so that you'd think you were still on the path, when in reality you were stepping into nothingness. God help him if I lay my hands upon him." He paused a moment and then said in a totally different tone, "We've never spoken of these things, Anne, have we? But the time's come. I want you to hear the whole story, from the beginning." "If it hurts you to go over the past, don't tell me," I said in a low voice. "But I want you to know. I never thought should speak of that part of my life to anyone. Funny, isn't it, the tricks fate plays?" He was silent for a minute or two. The sun had set, and the velvety darkness of the African night was enveloping us like a mantle. "Some of it I know," I said gently. "What do you know?" "I know that your real name is Harry Lucas." Still he hesitated, not looking at me, but staring straight out in front of him. I had no clue as to what was passing in his mind, but at last he jerked his head forward as though acquiescing in some unspoken decision of his own, and began his story. Chapter 26. "You're right. My real name is Harry Lucas. My father was a retired soldier who came out to farm in Rhodesia. He died when I was in my second year at Cambridge." "Were you fond of him?" I asked suddenly. I don't know." Then he flushed and went on with sudden vehemence. "Why do I say that? I did love my father. We said bitter things to each other the last time I saw him, and we had many rows over my wildness and my debts, but I cared for the old man. I know how much now, when it's too late," he continued more quietly. "It was at Cambridge that I met the other fellow." "Young Ardsley?" "Yes, young Ardsley. His father, as you know, was one of South Africa's most prominent men. We drifted together at once, my friend and I. We had our love of South Africa in common, and we both had a taste for the untrodden places of the world. After he left Cambridge, Ardsley had a final quarrel with his father. The old man had paid his debt twice. He refused to do so again. There was a bitter scene between them. Sir Lawrence declared himself at the end of his patience. He would not do more for his son. He must stand on his own legs for a while. The result was, as you know, that those two young men went off to South America together, prospecting for diamonds. I'm not going into that now, but we had a wonderful time out there. Hardships in plenty, you understand, but it was a good life, a hand-to-mouth scramble for existence far from the beaten track. And my God, that's the place you know a friend. There was a bond forged between us two out there that only death could have broken. Well, as Colonel Race told you, our efforts were crowned with success. We found a second Kimberley in the heat of the British Guiana jungles. I can't tell you our elation. It wasn't so much the actual value in money of the find, you see. Ardsley was used to money, and he knew that when his father died he would be a millionaire, and Lucas had always been poor and was used to it. No, it was the sheer delight of discovery. He paused and then added, almost apologetically, "You don't mind my telling you this way, do you? As though I wasn't in it at all. It seems like that now when I look back and see those two boys. I almost forgot that one of them was Harry Rayburn." "Tell it any way you like," I said. He went on. "We came back to Kimberley, very cock-a-hoop over our find. We brought a magnificent selection of diamonds with us to submit to the experts, and then, in the hotel at Kimberley, we met her." I stiffened a little, and the hand that rested on the doorpost clenched itself involuntarily. Anita Grunberg. That was her name. She was an actress, quite young and very beautiful. She was South African born, but her mother was a Hungarian, I believe. There was some sort of mystery about her, and that, of course, heightened her attraction for two boys home from the wilds. She must have had an easy task. We both fell for her right away, and we both took it hard. It was the first shadow that had ever come between us, but even then it didn't weaken our friendship. Each of us, I honestly believe, was willing to stand aside for the other to go in and win, but that wasn't her game. Sometimes, afterwards, I wondered why it hadn't been, for Sir Lawrence Ardsley's only son was quite a parti. But the truth of it was that she was married, to a sorter in De Beers, though nobody knew of it. She had pretended enormous interest in our discovery, and we told her all about it, and even showed her the diamonds. Delilah, that's what she should have been called, and she played her part well. The De Beers robbery was discovered, and like a thunderclap, the police came down upon us. They seized our diamonds. We only laughed at first. The whole thing was so absurd. And then the diamonds were produced in court, and without question they were the stones stolen from De Beers. Anita Grunberg had disappeared. She had effected this substitution neatly enough, and our story that these were not the stones originally in our possession was laughed to scorn. Sir Lawrence Ardsley had enormous influence. He succeeded in getting the case dismissed, but it left two young men ruined and disgraced to face the world with the stigma of thief attached to their name, and it pretty well broke the old fellow's heart. He had one bitter interview with his son in which he heaped upon him every reproach imaginable. He had done what he could to save the family name, but from that day on, his son was his son no longer. He cast him off utterly. And the boy, like the proud young fool that he was, remained silent, disdaining to protest his innocence in the face of his father's disbelief. He came out furious from the interview. His friend was waiting for him. A week later, war was declared. The two friends enlisted together. You know what happened. The best pal a man ever had was killed, partly through his own mad recklessness in rushing into unnecessary danger. He died with his name tarnished. I swear to you, Anne, that it was mainly on his account that I was so bitter against that woman. I had gone deeper with him than with me. I had gone deeper with him than with me. I had been madly in love with her for the moment. I even think that I frightened her sometimes, but with him it was quieter and deeper feeling. She had been the very center of his universe, and her betrayal of him tore up the very roots of his life. The blow stunned him and left him paralyzed. Harry paused. After a minute or two, he went on. As you know, I was reported missing, presumed killed. I never troubled to correct the mistake. I took the name of Parker and came to this island, which I knew of old. At the beginning of the war, I had ambitious hopes of proving my innocence, but now all that spirit seemed dead. All I felt wasn't what's the good? My pal was dead. Neither he nor I had any living relations who could care. I was supposed to be dead too, let it remain at that. I led a peaceful existence here, neither happy nor unhappy, numbed of all feeling. I see now, though I did not realize it at the time, that was partly the effect of the war. And then one day something occurred to wake me right up again. It was I was taking a party of people in my boat on a trip up the river, and I was standing at the landing stage helping them in, when one of the men uttered a startled exclamation. It focused my attention on him. He was a small, thin man with a beard, and he was staring at me for all he was worth, as though I was a ghost. So powerful was his emotion that it awakened my curiosity. I made inquiries of him at the hotel and learned that his name was Carton, that he came from Kimberley, and that he was a diamond sorter employed by De Beers. And in a minute all the old sense of wrong surged over me. I left the island and went to Kimberley. I could find out little more about him, however. In the end, I decided that I must force an interview. I took my revolver with me. In the brief glimpse I had had of him, I had realized that he was a physical coward. No sooner were we face to face than I recognized that he was afraid of me. I soon forced him to tell me all he knew. He had engineered part of the robbery, and Anita Grunberg was his wife. He had once caught sight of both of us when we were dining with him at the hotel, and having read that I was killed, my appearance in the flesh of the falls had startled him badly. He and Anita had married quite young, but she had soon drifted away from him. She got in with a bad lot, he told me, and it was then for the first time that I heard of the Colonel. Carton himself had never been mixed up in anything except this one affair, so he solemnly assured me, and I was inclined to believe him. He was emphatically not of the stuff of which successful criminals are made. I still had the feeling that he was keeping back something. As a test, I threatened to shoot him there and then, declaring that I cared very little what became of me now. In a frenzy of terror, he poured out a further story. It seemed that Anita Grunberg did not quite trust the Colonel. Whilst pretending to hand over to him the stones she had taken from the hotel, she kept back some in her own possession. Carton advised her, with his technical knowledge, which to keep. If at any time these stones were produced, they were of such color and quality as to be readily identifiable, and the experts at De Beers would admit at once that these stones had never passed through their hands. In this way, my story of a substitution would be supported, my name would be cleared, and a suspicion would be diverted to the proper quarter. I gathered that, contrary to his usual practice, the colonel himself had been concerned in this affair. Therefore, Anita felt satisfied that she had a real hold over him, should she need it. Carton now proposed that I should make the bargain with Anita Grunberg, or Nadina, as she now called herself, for a sufficient sum of money. He thought that she would be willing to give up the diamonds and betray her former employer. He would cable her immediately. I was still suspicious of Carton. He was a man whom it was easy enough to frighten, but who, in his fright, would tell so many lies that to sift the truth out from them would be no easy job. I went back to the hotel and waited. By the following evening I judged that he would have received the reply to his cable. I called round to his house, and was told that Mr. Carton was away, but would be returning on the morrow. Instantly I became suspicious. In the nick of time I found out that he was in reality sailing for England on the Kilmorden Castle, which left Cape Town in 2 days' time. I had just time to journey down and catch the same boat. I had no intention of alarming Carton by revealing my presence on board. I had done a good deal of acting in my time at Cambridge, and it was comparatively easy for me to transform myself into a grave, bearded gentleman of middle age. I avoided Carton carefully on board the boat, keeping to my own cabin as far as possible under the pretence of illness. I had no difficulty in trailing him when he got to London. We went straight to a hotel and did not go out until the following day. He left the hotel shortly before 1 o'clock. I was behind him. We went straight to a house agent in Knightsbridge. There he asked for particulars of houses to let on the river. I was at the next table, also inquiring about houses. Then suddenly, in walked Anita Grunberg, Nadina, whatever you like to call her. Superb, insolent, and almost as beautiful as ever. God, how I hated her. There she was, the woman who had ruined my life, and who had also ruined a better life than mine. At that minute I could have put my hands round her neck and squeezed the life out of her, inch by inch. But for a minute or two I saw red. Just for a minute or two I saw red. I hardly took in what the agent was saying. It was her voice that I heard next, high and clear, with an exaggerated foreign accent. "The Mill House, Marlow, the property of Sir Eustace Pedlar. That sounds as though it might suit me. At any rate, I will go and see it." The man wrote her an order, and she walked out again in her regal, insolent manner. Not by word or a sign had she recognized Carton, yet I was sure that their meeting there was a preconceived plan. Then I started to jump to conclusions. Not knowing that Sir Eustace was at Cannes, I thought that this house-hunting business was a mere pretext for meeting him in the mill house. I knew that he had been in South Africa at the time of the robbery, and never having seen him, I immediately leaped to the conclusion that he himself was the mysterious colonel of whom I had heard so much. I followed my 2 suspects from Knightsbridge. Nadina went into the Hyde Park Hotel. I quickened my pace, and went in also. She walked straight into the restaurant, and I decided that I should not risk her recognizing me at the moment, but would continue to follow Carton. I was in great hopes that he was going to get the diamonds, and that by suddenly appearing and making myself known to him when he least expected it, I might startle the truth out of him. I followed him down into the tube station at Hyde Park Corner. He was standing by himself at the end of the platform. There was some girl standing near, but no one else. I decided that I would accost him then and there. You know what happened. In the sudden shock of seeing a man whom he imagined far away in South Africa, he lost his head and stepped back upon the line. He was always a coward. Under the pretext of being a doctor, I managed to search his pockets. There was a wallet with some notes in it, and one or two unimportant letters. There was a roll of films, which I must have dropped somewhere later, and then there was a piece of paper with an appointment made on it for the 22nd on the Kilmorden Castle. In my haste to get away before anyone detained me, I dropped that also, but Fortunately, I remembered the figures. I hurried to the nearest cloakroom and hastily removed my makeup. I did not want to be laid by the heels for picking a dead man's pocket. Then I retraced my steps to the Hyde Park Hotel. Nadina was still having lunch. I needn't describe in detail how I followed her down to Marlow. She went into the house, and I spoke to the woman at the lodge, pretending that I was with her. Then I, too, went in. He stopped. There was a tense silence. "You will believe me, Anne, won't you? I swear before God that that what I am going to say is true. I went into the house after her with something very like murder in my heart, and she was dead. I found her in that first floor room. God, I was horrible. Dead. And I was not more than 3 minutes behind her. There was no sign of anyone else in the house. Of course, I realized at once the terrible position I was in. By one master stroke, the blackmailed had rid himself of the blackmailer, and at the same time had provided a victim to whom the crime would be ascribed. The hand of the colonel was very plain. For the second time I was to be his victim. Fool that I had been to walk into the trap so easily. I hardly know what I did next. I managed to go out of the place looking fairly normal, but I knew that it could not be long before the crime was discovered and the description of my appearance telegraphed all over the country. I lay low for some days, not daring to make a move. In the end, chance came to my aid. I overheard a conversation between two middle-aged gentlemen in the street, one of whom proved to be Sir Eustace Pedlar. I at once conceived the idea of attaching myself to him as his secretary. The fragment of conversation I had overheard gave me my clue. I was now no longer so sure that Sir Eustace Pedlar was the colonel. His house might have been appointed as a rendezvous by accident, but for some obscure motive that I had not fathomed. "Do you know," I interrupted, "that Guy Paget was in Marlow at the date of the murder?" "That settles it, then. I thought he was akin with Sir Eustace. He was supposed to be in Florence, but he certainly never went there. I'm pretty certain he was really in Marlow, but of course I can't prove it. And to think I never suspected Paget for a minute until the night he tried to throw you overboard. The man's a marvelous actor." "Yes, isn't he?" "That explained why the mill house was chosen. Paget could probably get in and out of it unobserved. Of course, he made no objection to my accompanying Sir Eustace across in the boat. He didn't want me laid by the heels immediately, and you see, evidently Nadina didn't bring the jewels with her to the rendezvous, as they had counted on her doing. I fancied that Carton really had them and concealed them somewhere on the Kilmorden Castle. That's where he came in. They hoped that I might have some clue as to where they were hidden. As long as the colonel did not recover the diamonds, he was still in danger. Hence his anxiety to get them at all costs. Where the devil Carton hid them, if he did hide them, I don't know." "That's another story," I quoted. "My story, and I'm going to tell it to you now." Chapter 27. Harry listened attentively whilst I recounted all the events that I have narrated in these pages. The thing that bewildered and astonished him most was to find that all along the diamonds had been in my possession, or rather in Suzanne's. That was a fact he had never suspected. Of course, after hearing his story, I realized the point of Carton's arrangement, or rather Nadina's, since I had no doubt that it was her brain which had conceived the plan. No surprise tactics executed against her or her husband could result in the seizure of the diamonds. The secret was locked in her own brain, and the colonel was not likely to guess that they had been entrusted to the keeping of an ocean steward. Harry's vindication from the old charge of theft seemed assured. It was the other graver change that paralyzed all our activities. For as things stood, he could not come out in the open to prove his case. The one thing we came back to again and again was the identity of the colonel. Was he or was he not Guy Paget? I should say he was, but for one thing, said Harry. It seems pretty much of a certainty that it was Paget who murdered Anita Grunberg at Marlow, and that certainly lends color to the suspicion that he is actually the colonel, since Anita's business was not of the nature to be discussed with a subordinate. No, the only thing that militates against the theory is the attempt to put you out of the way the night of your arrival here. You saw Paget left behind at Cape Town. By no possible means could he have arrived here before the following Wednesday. He is unlikely to have any emissaries in this part of the world, and all his plans were laid to deal with you in Cape Town. He might, of course, have cabled instructions to some lieutenant of his in Johannesburg, who could have joined the Rhodesian train at Mafeking. But his instructions would have had to be particularly definite to allow of that note being written. We sat silent for a moment. Then Harry went on slowly. You say that Mrs. Blair was asleep when you left the hotel, and that you heard Sir Eustace dictating to Sir Pettigrew? Where was Colonel Race? I could not find him anywhere. Had he any reason to believe that you and I might be friendly with each other? He might have had, I answered thoughtfully, remembering our conversation on the way back from the Matapos. He's a very powerful personality, I continued, but not at all my idea of the colonel, and anyway, such an idea would be absurd. He's in the Secret Service. How do we know that he is? It's the easiest thing in the world to throw out a hint of that kind. No one contradicts it, and the rumor spreads until everyone believes it as gospel truth. It provides an excuse for all sorts of doubtful doings, Anne. Do you like Race? I do, and I don't. He repels me and at the same time fascinates me. But I know one thing. I'm always a little afraid of him. He was in South Africa, you know, at the time of the Kimberley robbery, said Harry slowly. But it was he who told Suzanne all about the colonel and how he had been in Paris trying to get on his track. Camouflage, a particularly clever kind. But where does Paget come in? Is he in Race's pay? Perhaps, said Harry slowly. He doesn't come in at all. What? Think back, Anne. Did you ever see Paget's own account of that night on the Kilmorden? Oh, did you ever hear Paget's account of that night on the Kilmorden? Yes, through Sir Eustace. I repeated it. Harry listened closely. He saw a man coming from the direction of Sir Eustace's cabin and followed him up on deck. Is that what he says? Now, who had the cabin opposite to Sir Eustace? Colonel Race. Supposing Colonel Race crept up on deck and, foiled in his attack on you, fled round the deck and met Paget just coming through the saloon door. He knocks him down and springs inside, closing the door. Sorry about this. He knocks him down and springs inside, closing the door. We dash round and find Paget lying there. How's that? You forget that he declares positively that it was you who knocked him down. Well, suppose that just as he regains consciousness, he sees me disappearing in the distance. Wouldn't he take it for granted that I was his assailant, especially as he thought all along it was I he was following? It's possible, yes, I said slowly, but it alters all our ideas, and there are other things. Most of them are open to explanation. The man who followed you in Cape Town spoke to Paget, and Paget looked at his watch. The man might have merely asked him the time. It was just a coincidence, you mean? Not exactly. There's a method in all this, connecting Paget with the affair. Why was the mill house chosen for the murder? Was it because Paget had been in Kimberley when the diamonds were stolen? Would he have been made the scapegoat if I had not appeared so providentially upon the scene? Then you think he may be entirely innocent? Looks like it, but if so, we've got to find out what he was doing in Marlow. If he's got a reasonable explanation for that, we're on the right track. He got up. It's past midnight. Turn in, Anne, and get some sleep. Just before dawn, I'll take you over in the boat. You must catch the train at Livingston. We've got a friend there who will keep you hidden away until the train starts. You go to Bulawayo and catch the Beira train there. I can find out from my friend in Livingston what's going on at the hotel and where your friends are now. Beira, I said meditatively. Yes, Anne, it's Beira for you. This is man's work. Leave it to me. We had had a momentary respite from emotion whilst he talked the situation out, but it was on us again now. We did not even look at each other. Very well, I said, and passed into the hut. I lay down on the skin-covered couch, but I couldn't sleep, and outside I could hear Harry Rayburn pacing up and down through the long, dark hours. At last he called me. Come, Anne, it's time to go. I got up and came out obediently. It was still quite dark, but I knew that dawn was not far off. Well, take the canoe, not the motorboat, Harry began, when suddenly he stopped dead and held up his hand. Hush, what's that? I listened, but I could hear nothing. His ears were sharper than mine, however, the ears of a man who had lived long in the wilderness. Presently I heard it too, the faint splash of paddles in the water coming from the direction of the right bank of the river and rapidly approaching our little landing stage. We strained our eyes in the darkness and could make out a dark blur on the surface of the water. It was a boat. There was a momentary spurt of flame. Someone had struck a match. By its light I recognized one figure, the red-headed Dutchman at the villa in Muizenberg. The others were natives. Quick, back to the hut. Harry swept me back with him. He took down a couple of rifles and a revolver from the wall. Can you load a rifle? I never have. Show me how. I grasped his instructions well enough. We closed the door, and Harry stood by the window, which overlooked the landing stage. The boat was just about to run alongside it. Who's that? Called out Harry in a ringing voice. Hi, John. Good to see you. Any doubt we might have had as to our visitor's intentions was swiftly resolved. A hail of bullets splattered round us. Fortunately, neither of us was hit. Harry raised the rifle. It spat murderously, and again. I heard 2 groans and a splash. That's given him something to think about, he muttered grimly as he reached for the second rifle. Stand well back, Anne, for God's sake, and load quickly. More bullets. One just grazed Harry's cheek. His answering fire was more deadly than theirs. I had the rifle reloaded when he turned for it. He caught me close with his left arm and kissed me once savagely before he turned to the window again. Suddenly he uttered a shout. They're going! Had enough of it. They're a good mark out there on the water, and they can't see how many of us there are. They're routed for the moment. They'll come back. We'll have to get ready for them. He flung down the rifle and turned to me. Anne, you beauty, you wonder, you little queen, as brave as a lion, black-haired, a witch. He caught me in his arms. He kissed my hair, my eyes, my mouth. Now to business, he said, suddenly releasing me. Get out those tins of paraffin. I did as I was told. He was busy inside the hut. Presently I saw him on the roof of the hut, crawling along with something in his arms. He rejoined me in a minute or two. Go down to the boat. We'll have to carry it across the island to the other side. He picked up the paraffin as I disappeared. They're coming back, I called softly. I had seen the blur moving out from the opposite shore. He ran down to me. Just in time. Why, where's the hell's the boat? Both had been cut adrift. Harry whistled slowly. We're in a tight place, honey. Mind? Not with you.
Ah, but dying together's not much fun. We'll do better than that. See, they've got 2 boatloads this time. Going to land at 2 different points. Now for my little scenic effect." Almost as he spoke, a long flame shot up from the hut. Its light illuminated 2 crouching figures huddled together on the roof. My old clothes stuffed with rags, but they won't tumble it for some time. Come, Anne, we've got to try desperate means. Hand in hand, we raced across the island. Only a narrow channel of water divided it from the house on that side. We've got to swim for it. Can you swim at all, Anne? Not that it matters. I can get you across. It's the wrong side for a boat, too many rocks, but the right side for swimming and the right side for Livingston. I can swim a little, further than that. What's the danger, Harry? For I had seen in the grim look on his face. Sharks? No, you little goose. Sharks live in the sea. But you're sharp, Anne. Crocs, that's the trouble. Crocodiles? Yes. Don't think of them, or say your prayers, whichever you feel inclined. We plunged in. My prayers must have been fishes, for we reached the shore without adventure, and drew ourselves up, wet and dripping, on the bank. Now for Livingston. It's rough going, I'm afraid, and wet clothes won't make it any better, but it's got to be done. That walk was a nightmare. My wet skirts flapped round my legs, and my stockings were torn off by the thorns. Finally, I stopped, utterly exhausted. Harry came back to me. Hold up, honey, I'll carry you for a bit. That was the way I came into Livingston, slung across his shoulder like a sack of coals. How he did it for all that way, I don't know. The first faint light of dawn was just breaking. Harry's friend was a young man of 20 years old who kept a store of native curios. His name was Ned. Perhaps he had another, but I never heard it. He didn't seem in the least surprised to see Harry walk in, dripping wet, holding an equally dripping female by the hand. Men are very wonderful. He gave us food to eat and hot coffee, and got our clothes dried for us whilst we rolled ourselves in Manchester blankets of gaudy hue. It was in the tiny room of the hut we were safe from observation, whilst he departed to make judicious inquiries as to what had become of Sir Eustace's party, and whether any of them were still at the hotel. It was then that I informed Harry that nothing would induce me to go to Beira. I never meant to, anyway, but now all reason for such proceedings had vanished. The point of the plan had been that my enemies believed me dead. Now that they knew I wasn't dead, my going to Beira would do no good whatever. They could easily follow me there and murder me quietly. I should have no one to protect me. It was finally arranged that I should join Suzanne, wherever she was, and devote all my energies to taking care of myself. On one account was I to seek adventure, or endeavor to checkmate the colonel. On no account. That drastically changes that. I was to remain quietly with her and await instructions from Harry. The diamonds were to be deposited in the Bank of Kimberley under the name of Parker. There's one thing, I said thoughtfully. We ought to have a code of some kind. We don't want to be hoodwinked again by messages purporting to come from one to the other. That's easy enough. Any message that comes genuinely from me will have the words "and" crossed out in it. Without trademark, none genuine, I murmured. What about wires? Any wires from me will be signed Andy. Train will be in before long, Harry, said Ned, putting his head in and withdrawing it immediately. I stood up. And shall I marry a nice steady man if I find one? I asked demurely. Harry came close to me. My God! And if you ever marry anyone else but me, I'll wring his neck. And as for you... Yes, I said, pleasurably excited. I shall carry you away and beat you black and blue. What a delightful husband I have chosen, I said satirically. And doesn't he change his mind overnight? Chapter 28.
Extract from the diary of Sir Eustace Pedlar. As I remember once again, I am essentially a man of peace. I yearn for a quiet life, and that's just the one thing I don't seem able to have. I'm always in the middle of storms and alarms. The relief of getting away from Paget with his incessant nosing out of intrigues was enormous. And Miss Pettigrew is certainly a useful creature, although there is nothing of the Ori about her. One or two of her accomplishments are invaluable. It is true that I had a touch of liver at Bulawayo and behaved like a bear in consequence, but I had had a disturbed night in the train. At 3 a.m., an exquisitely dressed young man, looked like a musical comedy hero of the Wild West, entered my compartment and asked where I was going. Discarded my first murmur of tea, and for God's sake don't put sugar in it. He repeated his question, laying stress on the fact that he was not a waiter, but an immigration officer. I finally succeeded in satisfying him that I was suffering from no infectious disease, that I was visiting Rhodesia from the purest of motives, and further gratified him with my full Christian names and my place of birth. I then endeavored to snatch a little sleep, but some officious ass roused me at 5:30 with a cup of liquid sugar, which he called tea. I don't think I threw it at him, but I know that that was what I wanted to do. He brought me unsugared tea, stone cold, at 6, and then I fell asleep utterly exhausted, to awaken just opposite Bulawayo and be landed with a beastly wooden giraffe, all legs and neck. But for these small contretemps, all had been going smoothly, and then fresh calamity befell. It was the night of our arrival at the falls. I was distracting to Miss Pettigrew in my sitting room, when suddenly Mrs. Blair burst in without a word of excuse and wearing most compromising attire. "Where's Anne?" she cried. A nice question to ask, as though I were responsible for the girl. What did she expect Miss Pettigrew to think? That I am in the habit of producing Anne Bedingfeld from my pocket at midnight or thereabouts? Very compromising for a man in my position. "I presume," I said coldly, "that she is in her bed." I cleared my throat and glanced at Miss Pettigrew to show that I was really ready to resume dictating. I hoped Mrs. Blair would take the hint. She did nothing of the kind. Instead, she sank into a chair and waved a slippered foot in my agitated manner. "She's not in her room. I've been there. I had a dream, a terrible dream, that she was in some awful danger and got up and went to her room just to reassure myself, you know. She wasn't there and her bed hadn't been slept in." She looked at me appealingly. "What shall I do, Sir Eustace?" Repressing the desire to reply, "Go to bed and don't worry over nothing. An able-bodied young woman like Anne Bedingfeld is perfectly well able to take care of herself." I frowned judiciously. What does Race say about this? Why should Race have it all his own way? Let him have some of the disadvantages as well as the advantages of female society. I can't find him anywhere. She was evidently making a night of it. I sighed and sat down in a chair. "I don't quite see the reason for your agitation," I said patiently. "My dream. That curry we had for dinner." "Oh, Sir Eustace!" The woman was quite indignant, and yet everybody knows that nightmares are a direct result of injudicious eating. "After all," I continued persuasively, "why shouldn't Anne Bedingfeld and Race go out for a little stroll without having the whole hotel roused by it?" "You think they've just gone out for a stroll together? But it's after midnight." "One does these foolish things when one is young," I murmured, though Race is certainly old enough to know better. "Do you really think so?" "I dare say they've run away to make a match of it," I continued soothingly, though fully aware that I was making an idiotic suggestion. For, after all, at a place like this, where is there to run to get away to?
I don't know how much longer I should have gone on making feeble remarks, but at that moment Race himself walked in upon us. At any rate, I had been partly right. He had been off for a stroll, but he hadn't taken Anne with him. However, I had been quite wrong in my way of dealing with the situation. I was soon shown that. Race had the whole hotel turned upside down in 3 minutes. I've never seen a man more upset. Hi, Corel, good to see you. How was work? The thing is very extraordinary. Where did the girl go? She walked out of the hotel fully dressed about 10 minutes past 11, and she was never seen again. The idea of suicide seems impossible. She was one of those energetic young women who are in love with life and have not the faintest intention of quitting it. There was no train either way until midday on the morrow, so she can't have left the place. Then where the devil is she? Oh, okay, I thought you had for some reason. Well, I hope that you've been having a nice chill day. Race is almost beside himself, poor fellow. He has left no stone unturned. All the DCs, or whatever they call themselves, for hundreds of miles round, have been pressed into the service. The native trackers have gone about on all fours. Everything that can be done is being done. But no sign of Anne Bedingfeld. The accepted story is that she walked in her sleep. There are signs on the path near the bridge which seem to show that the girl walked deliberately off the edge. If so, of course, she must have been dashed to pieces on the rocks below. Unfortunately, most of the footprints were obliterated by a party of tourists who chose to walk that way early on the Monday morning. I don't know that it's a very satisfactory theory. In my young days, I was always told that sleepwalkers couldn't hurt themselves, but their own sixth sense took care of them. I didn't think the theory satisfied Mrs. Blair either. I can't make that woman out. Her whole attitude toward Race has changed. She watches him now like a cat and a mouse, and she makes obvious efforts to bring herself to be civil to him. And they used to be such friends. Altogether, she is unlike herself, nervous, hysterical, starting and jumping at the least sound. I'm beginning to think that it is high time I went to Joburg. A rumor came along yesterday at a mysterious island somewhere up the river with a man and a girl on it. Race got very excited. It turned out to be all a mare's nest, however. The man had been there for years and is well known to the manager of the hotel. He takes parties up and down the river in the season and points out crocodiles and a stray hippopotamus or so to them. I believe that he keeps a tame one which is trained to bite pieces out of the boat on occasions. Then he fends it off with a boat hook, and the party feel they have really got to the back of beyond at last. How long the girl has been there is not definitely known, but it seems pretty clear that she can't be Anne, and there is a certain delicacy in interfering in other people's affairs. If I were this young fellow, I should certainly kick Race off the island if he came asking questions about my love affairs. Later. It is definitely settled that I go to Joburg tomorrow. Race urges me to do so. Things are getting unpleasant there, I hear, but I might as well go before they get worse. I dare say I shall be shot by a striker anyway. Mrs. Blair was to have accompanied me, but at the last minute she changed her mind and decided to go on to the falls. Seems as though she couldn't bear to take her eyes off Race. She came to me tonight and said, with some hesitation, that she had a favor to ask. Would I take charge of her souvenirs for her? Not the animals, I asked in lively alarm. I always felt that I should get struck with those beastly animals sooner or later. In the end, we effected a compromise. I took charge of 2 small wooden boxes for her which contained fragile articles. The animals are to be packed by the local store in vast crates and sent to Cape Town by rail, where Paget will see to their being stored. The people who who are packing them say that they are of particularly awkward shape, and that special cases will have to be made. I pointed out to Mrs. Blair that by the time she has got them home, those animals will have cost her easily £1 apiece. Paget is straining at the leash to rejoin me in Joburg. I shall make an excuse of Mrs. Blair's cases to keep him in Cape Town. I have written him that he must receive the cases and see to their safe disposal, as they contain rare curios of immense value. So all is settled, and I and Miss Pettigrew go off into the blue together, and anyone who has seen Miss Pettigrew will admit that she is perfectly respectable. Chapter break, so I'm just going to take a quick moment. I have to put my hair up. I have really long hair and it gets heavy. Sorry about the delay here. Yeah, this might go like a half an hour to an hour over, but we'll see. I haven't yet. I went kind of straight to bed after the stream last night, and then totally forgot about it this morning. I'll have to look at it tonight. Remind me on the Discord, if you would. Okay. And we are back. Chapter 29. Johannesburg, March 6th. There is something about the state of things here that is not at all healthy. To use the well-known phrase that I have so often read, we are all living on the edge of a volcano. Ooh, that's perfectly appropriate for this year. Bands of strikers, or so-called strikers, patrol the streets and scowl at one in a murderous fashion. They are picking out the bloated capitalists ready for when the massacre begins, I suppose. You can't ride in a taxi. If you do, strikers pull you out again. And the hotels hint pleasantly that when the food gives out, they will fling you out on the mat. I met Reeves, my labor friend of the Kilmorton, last night. He has cold feet worse than any man I ever saw. He's like all the rest of these people. They make inflammatory speeches of enormous length, solely for political purposes, and then wish they hadn't. He's busy now going about and saying he didn't really do it. When I met him, he was just off to Cape Town, where he meditates making a 3-day speech in Dutch, vindicating himself and pointing out that the things he said really meant something entirely different. I'm thankful that I do not have to sit in the Legislative Assembly of South Africa. The House of Commons is bad enough, but at least we have only one language and some slight restrictions as to the length of speeches. When I went to the Assembly before leaving Cape Town, I listened to a gray-haired gentleman with a drooping mustache who looked exactly like the Mock Turtle in Alice in Wonderland. He dropped out his words one by one in a particularly melancholy fashion. Every now and then he galvanized himself to further efforts by ejaculating something that sounded like "plat skeet," uttered fortissimo, and in marked contrast to the rest of his delivery. When he did this, half his audience yelled "woof, woof," which is possibly Dutch for "hear, hear," and the other half woke up with a start from the pleasant nap they had been having. I was given to understand that the gentleman had been speaking for at least 3 days. They must have a lot of patience in South Africa. I have invented endless jobs to keep Paget in Cape Town, but at last the fertility of my imagination is given out, and he joins me tomorrow in the spirit of the faithful dog who comes to die by his master's side. And I am getting on so well with my reminiscences, too. I had invented some extraordinarily witty things that the strike leaders said to me, and I said to the strike leaders. This morning I was interviewed by a government official. He was urbane, persuasive, and mysterious in turn. To begin with, he alluded to my exalted position and importance, and suggested that I should remove myself, or be removed by him, to Pretoria. "You expect trouble, then?" I asked. His reply was so worded as to have no meaning whatsoever, so I gathered that they were expecting serious trouble. I suggested to him that his government were letting things go rather too far. There is such a thing as giving a man enough hope and letting him hang himself, Sir Eustace. Oh, quite so, quite so. It is not the strikers themselves who are causing the trouble. There is some organization at work behind them. Arms and explosives have been pouring in, and we have made a haul of certain documents which throw a good deal of light on the methods adopted to import them. There is a regular code. Potatoes means detonators, cauliflower, rifles. Other vegetables stand for various explosives. It's very interesting, I commented. More than that, Sir Eustace. We have every reason to believe that the man who runs the whole show, the directing genius of the affair, is at this minute in Johannesburg. He stared at me so hard that I began to fear that he suspected me of being the man. I broke out into a cold perspiration at the thought, and began to regret that I had ever conceived the idea of inspecting a miniature revolution at first hand. No trains are running from Joburg to Pretoria, he continued, but I can arrange to send you over by private car. In case you should be stopped on the way, I can provide you with 2 separate passes, one issued by the Union government, and the other stating that you are an English visitor who has nothing whatever to do with the Union. One for your people and one for the strikers, eh? Exactly. The project did not appeal to me. I know what happens in a case of that kind. You get flustered and mix the things up. I should hand the wrong pass to the wrong person, and it would end in my being summarily shot by a bloodthirsty rebel or one of the supporters of law and order whom I noticed guarding the streets, wearing bowler hats and smoking pipes, with rifles tucked carelessly under their arms. Besides, what should I do with myself in Pretoria? Admire the architecture of the Union's buildings and listen to the echoes of the shooting round Johannesburg? I should be penned up there God knows how long. They've blown up the railway line already, I hear. It isn't even as if one could get a drink there. They put the whole place under martial law 2 days ago. My dear fellow, I said, you don't seem to realize that I'm studying conditions on the Rand. How the devil am I going to study them from Pretoria? I appreciate your care for my safety, but don't worry about me. I shall be all right. I warn you, Sir Eustace, that the food question is already serious. A little fasting will improve my figure, I said with a sigh. We were interrupted by a telegram being handed to me. I read it with amazement. Anne is safe! Here with me at Kimberley, Suzanne Blair. I don't think I ever really believed in the annihilation of Anne. There is something particularly indestructible about that young woman. She's like the patent balls that one gives to terriers. She has an extraordinary knack of turning up smiling. I still don't see why it was necessary for her to walk out of the hotel in the middle of the night in order to get to Kimberley. There was no train. Anyway, she must have put on a pair of angel's wings and flown there, and I don't suppose she will ever explain. Nobody does, to me. I always have to guess. It becomes monotonous after a while. The exigencies of journalism are at the bottom of it, I suppose. How I shot the rapids by our special correspondents. I refolded the telegram and got rid of my governmental friend. I don't like the prospect of being hungry, but I'm not alarmed for my personal safety. Smuts is perfectly capable of dealing with the revolution, but I would give a considerable sum of money for a drink. I wonder if Paget will have the sense to bring a bottle of whiskey with him when he arrives tomorrow. I put on my hat and went out, intending to buy a few sovereigns, souvenirs. The curio shops in Joburg are rather pleasant. I was just studying a window full of imposing carrosses when a man coming out of the shop canoed into me. To my surprise, it turned out to be Race. I can't flatter myself that he looked pleased to see me. I can't flatter myself that he looked pleased to see me. As a matter of fact, he looked distinctly annoyed, but I insisted on his accompanying me back to the hotel. I get tired of having no one but Miss Pettigrew to talk to. I had no idea you were in Joburg, I said chattingly. When did you arrive? Last night. Where are you staying? With friends. He was disposing to be extraordinarily taciturn, and I seemed to be embarrassed by my questions. I hope they keep poultry, I remarked. A diet of new-laid eggs and the occasional slaughtering of an old cock will be decidedly agreeable soon, from all I hear. By the way, I said, when we were back in the hotel, have you heard that Miss Bedingfell is alive and kicking? He nodded. She gave us quite a fright, I said airily. Where the devil did she go to that night? That's what I'd like to know. She was on the island all the time. Which island? Not the one with a young man on it? Yes. Oh, very improper, I said. Paget will be quite shocked. He always did disapprove of Anne Bedingfeld. I suppose that was the young man she originally intended to meet in Durban? I don't think so. Don't tell anything if you don't want to, I said by way of encouraging him. I fancy that this is a young man we should all be very glad to lay our hands on. Not, I cried in rising astonishment. He nodded. Harry Rayburn, alias Harry Lucas. That is his real name, you know. He's given us all the slip once more, but we're bound to rope him soon. Dear me, I murmured. We don't suspect the girl of complicity in any case. On her side, it's just a love affair. I always did think Race was in love with Anne. The way he said those last words made me feel sure of it. She's gone to Beira, he continued rather hastily. Indeed, I said, staring. How do you know? She wrote to me from Bulawayo, telling me she was going home that way. The best thing she can do, poor child. Somehow I don't fancy she is in Beira, I said meditatively. But she was just starting when she wrote. I was puzzled. Somebody was clearly lying. Without stopping to reflect that Anne might have excellent reasons for her misleading statements, I gave myself up to the pleasure of scoring off Race. He's always so cocksure. I took the telegram from my pocket and handed it to him. Then how do you explain this? I said nonchalantly. He seemed dumbfounded. She said she was just starting for Beira, he said in a dazed voice. I know that Race is supposed to be clever. He is, in my opinion, rather a stupid man. It never seemed to occur to him that girls do not always tell the truth. Kimberly, too. What are they doing there? He muttered. Yes, that surprised me. I should have thought Miss Anne would have been in the thick of it there, gathering copy for the daily budget. Kimberly, he said again. The place seemed to upset him. There's nothing to see there. The pits aren't being worked. You know what women are, I said vaguely. He shook his head and went off. I have evidently given him something to think about. No sooner had he departed than my government official appeared. I hope you will forgive me for troubling you again, Sir Eustace, he apologized. But there are 1 or 2 questions I should like to ask you. Certainly, my dear fellow, he said cheerfully. Ask away. It concerns your secretary. I know nothing about him, I said hastily. He foisted himself upon me in London, robbed me of valuable papers, of which I shall be hauled over the coals, and disappeared like a conjuring trick at Cape Town. It's true that I was in the falls at the same time as he was, but I was at the hotel and he was on an island. I can assure you that I never set eyes upon him the whole time that I was there." I paused for breath. You misunderstand me. It was of your other secretary that I spoke." "What? Paget!" I cried in lively astonishment. "He's been with me 8 years, a most trustworthy fellow." My interlocutor smiled. "We are still at cross purposes. I refer to the lady." "Miss Pettigrew?" I exclaimed. "Yes, she has been seen coming out of a Grassato's native curio shop." "God bless my soul!" I interrupted. "I was going into that place myself this afternoon. You might have caught me coming out. There doesn't seem to be any innocent thing that one can do in Joburg without being suspected for it." "Ah, but she has been seen more than once there, and in rather doubtful circumstances. I may as well tell you, in confidence, Sir Eustace, that the place is suspected of being a well-known rendezvous used by the secret organization behind this revolution. That is why I should be glad to hear all that you can tell me about this lady. Where and how did you come to engage her?" "She was lent to me," I replied coldly, "by your own government." He collapsed utterly. Chapter 30. Anne's narrative resumed. 1. As soon as I got to Kimberley, I wired to Suzanne. She joined me there with the utmost dispatch, heralding her arrival with telegrams sent off en route. I was awfully surprised to find that she really was fond of me. I thought I had been just a new sensation, but she positively fell on my neck and wept when we met. When we had recovered from our emotion a little, I sat down on the bed and told her the whole story from A to Z. "You always did suspect Race," she said thoughtfully when I had finished. "I didn't until the night you disappeared. I liked him so much all along, and I thought he would make such a nice husband for you." "Oh, Anne, dear, don't be cross. But how do you know that this young man of yours is telling you the truth? You believe every word he says." "Of course I do," I cried indignantly. But what is there in him that attracts you so? I don't see that there's anything in him at all, except his rather reckless good looks and his modern chic-cum Stone-Age love-making." I poured out the vials of my wrath upon Suzanne for some minutes. "Just because you're comfortably married and getting fat, you've forgotten there's any such thing as romance," I ended. "Oh, I'm not getting fat, Anne. All the worry I've had about you lately must have worn me to a shred." "You look particularly well nourished," I said coldly. "I should say you must have put on about half a stone." "And I don't know that I'm so comfortably married either," continued Anne in a melancholy voice. "I've been having the most dreadful cables from Clarence ordering me to come home at once. At last I didn't answer them, and now I haven't heard for over a fortnight." I'm afraid I didn't take Suzanne's matrimonial troubles very seriously. She will be able to get round Clarence all right when the time comes. I turned the conversation to the subject of the diamonds. Suzanne looked at me with a dropped jaw. "I must explain, Anne. You see, as soon as I began to suspect Colonel Race, I was terribly upset about the diamonds. I wanted to stay on at the falls in case he might have kidnapped you somewhere close by, but didn't know what to do about the diamonds. I was afraid to keep him in my possessions." Suzanne looked round her uneasily, as though she feared the walls might have ears, and then whispered vehemently in my ear. "A distinctly good idea, and I approved at the time that it is. It's a bit awkward now. What did Sir Eustace do with the cases?" "The big ones were sent down to Cape Town. I heard from Paget before I left the falls, and he enclosed the receipt for the storage. He's leaving Cape Town today to join Sir Eustace in Johannesburg." "I see," I said thoughtfully. "And the small ones, where are they?" "As suppose Sir Eustace has got them with him. I turned the matter over in my mind. Well, I said at last, it's awkward, but it's safe enough. We'd better do nothing for the present. Suzanne looked at me with a little smile. You don't like doing nothing, do you, Anne? Not very much, I replied honestly. The one thing I could do was to get hold of a timetable and see what time Guy Paget's train would pass through Kimberley. I found that it would arrive at 5:40 on the following afternoon and depart again at 6. I wanted to see Paget as soon as possible, and that seemed to me a good opportunity. The situation on the Rand was getting very serious, and it might be a long time before I got another chance. The only thing that livened up the day was a wire dispatched from Johannesburg, a most innocent-sounding telegram. Arrived safely, all going well. Eric here, also Eustace, but not Guy. Remain where you are for the present. Andy. Two. Eric was our pseudonym for race. I chose it because it is a name I dislike exceedingly. There was clearly nothing to be done until I could see Paget. Suzanne employed herself in sending off a long, soothing cable to the far-off Clarence. She became quite sentimental over him. In a way, which of course is quite different from me and Harry, she is really fond of Clarence. I do wish he were here, Anne, she gulped. It's such a long time since I've seen him. Have some face cream, I said soothingly. Anne rubbed a little on the tip of her charming nose. She'll want some more face cream soon, too, she remarked. And you can only get this kind in Paris, she sighed. Paris. Suzanne, I said, very soon you'll have had enough of South Africa and adventure. I should like a really nice hat, admitted Suzanne wistfully. Shall I come with you to meet Guy Paget tomorrow? I prefer to go alone. He'd be shyer speaking before two of us. So it came about that I was standing in the doorway of the hotel on the following afternoon, struggling with a recalcitrant parasol that refused to go up, while Suzanne lay peacefully on her bed with a book and a basket of fruit. According to the hotel porter, the train was on its good behavior today, and would be almost on time, though he was extremely doubtful whether it would ever get through to Johannesburg. The line had been blown up, so he solemnly assured me. It sounded cheerful. The train drew in just 10 minutes late. Everybody tumbled out on the platform and began walking up and down feverishly. I had no difficulty in espying Paget. I accosted him eagerly. He gave his usual nervous start at seeing me, somewhat accentuated this time. "Dear me, Miss Bedingfield, I understand that you had disappeared." "I have reappeared again," I told him solemnly. "And how are you, Mr. Paget?" "Very well, thank you. Looking forward to taking up my work again with Sir Eustace." "Hi, Reaper, good to see you." "Mr. Paget," I said, "there is something I wanted to ask you. I hope that you won't be offended, but a lot hangs on it, more than you can possibly guess. I want to know what you were doing at Marlow on the 8th of January last." He started violently. "Really, Miss Bedingfield, indeed, you were there, weren't you? For reasons of my own, I was in the neighborhood, yes." "Won't you tell me what those reasons were?" "Sir Eustace has not already told you?" "Sir Eustace? Does he know?" "I'm almost sure that he does. I hoped he had not recognized me, but from the hints that he has let drop in his remarks, I fear it is only too certain. In any case, I meant to make a clean breast of the matter and offer my resignation. He is a peculiar man, Miss Bedingfield, with an abnormal sense of humor. It seems to amuse him to keep me on tenterhooks. All the time, I dare say, he was perfectly well aware of the true facts. Possibly he has known them for years." I hoped that sooner or later I should be able to understand what Paget was talking about. He went on fluently. "It is different for a man of Sir Eustace's standing to put himself in my position. I know that I was in the wrong, but that seemed a harmless deception. I would have thought it better taste on his part to have tackled me outright, instead of indulging over covert jokes at my expense. A whistle blew, and the people began to surge back into the train. "Yes, Mr. Paget," I broke in, "I'm sure I quite agree with all you're saying about Sir Eustace, but why did you go to Marlow?" It was wrong of me, but natural under the circumstances. Yes, I still feel natural under the circumstances. "What circumstances?" I cried desperately. For the first time, Paget seemed to recognize that I was asking him a question. His mind detached itself from the particularities of Sir Eustace and his own justification and came to rest on me. "I beg your pardon, Miss Bedingfeld," he said stiffly, "but I fail to see your concern in the matter." He was back in the train now, leaning down to speak to me. I felt desperate. What could one do with a man like that? "Of course it is so dreadful that you'd be ashamed to speak of it to me," I began spitefully. At last I had found the right spot. Paget stiffened and flushed. "Dreadful? Ashamed? I don't understand you. Then tell me." In 3 short sentences he told me. At last I knew Paget's secret. It was not in the least what I expected. I walked slowly back to the hotel. There was a wire handed to me. I tore it open. It contained full and definite instructions for me to proceed forthwith to Johannesburg, or rather to a station this side of Johannesburg, where I should be met by a car. It was signed not Andy, but Harry. I sat down in a chair to do some very serious thinking. Chapter 31. From the Diary of Sir Eustace Pedlar. Johannesburg, March 7th. "Paget has arrived. He's in a blue funk, of course. Suggested at once that we should go off to Pretoria. Then, when I had told him kindly but firmly that we were going to remain here, he went to the other extreme, wished he had his rifle here, and began bucking about some bridge he guarded during the Great War. A railway bridge at Little Puddicombe Junction, or something of that sort. I soon cut that short by telling him to unpack the big typewriter. I thought that would keep him employed for some time, because the typewriter was sure to have gone wrong. It always does, and he would have to take it somewhere to be mended. But I had forgotten Paget's powers of being in the right. "I've already unpacked all the things, Sir Eustace. The typewriter is in perfect condition." "What do you mean, all the cases?" "The 2 small cases as well." "I wish you wouldn't be so officious, Paget. Those small cases were no business of yours. They belonged to Mrs. Blair." Paget looked crestfallen. He hates to make a mistake. "So you can just pack them up again neatly," I continued. "After that you can go out and look around you. Joburg will probably be a heap of smoking ruins by tomorrow, so it may be your last chance." I thought that would get rid of him successfully for the morning at any rate. "There's something I want to say to you when you have the leisure, Sir Eustace." "I haven't got it now," I said hastily. "At this minute I have absolutely no leisure whatsoever." Paget retired. "By the way," I called after him, "what was there in those cases of Mrs. Blair's?" Some fur rugs and a couple of fur hats, I think." "That's right," I assented. "She brought them on the train. They are hats of a kind, though I hardly wonder at your not recognizing them. I dare say she's going to wear one of them at Ascot. What else was there?" "Some rolls of film, some baskets, a lot of baskets." "There would be," I assured him. "Mrs. Blair is the kind of woman who never buys less than a dozen or so of anything." "I think that's all, Sir Eustace, except some miscellaneous odds and ends, a motor veil and some odd gloves, that sort of thing." "If you hadn't been a born idiot, Paget, you would have seen from the start that those couldn't possibly be my belongings." "I thought some of them might belong to Miss Pettigrew." "Ah, that reminds me. What did you mean by picking me out such a doubtful character as a secretary?" And I told him about the searching cross-examination I had been put through. Immediately I was sorry. I saw a glint in his eyes that I know only too well. I changed the conversation hurriedly, but it was too late. Paget was on the warpath. He next proceeded to bore me with a long, pointless story about the Kilmorden. It was about a roll of film and a wager, the roll of films being thrown through a porthole in the middle of the night by some steward who ought to have known better. I hate horseplay. I told Paget so, and he began to tell me the story all over again. He tells the story exceedingly badly anyway. It was a long time before I could make head or tail of this one. I did not see him again until lunchtime. Then he came in brimming over with excitement like a bloodhound on the scent. I never have cared for bloodhounds. The upshot of it was that he had seen Rayburn. What? I cried, startled. Yes, he had caught sight of someone whom he was sure was Rayburn crossing the street. Paget had followed him. And who do you think I saw him stop and speak to? Miss Pettigrew. What? Yes, Sir Eustace, and that's not all. I've been making inquiries about her. Wait a bit. What happened to Rayburn? He and Miss Pettigrew went into that corner curio shop. I uttered an involuntary exclamation. Paget stopped inquiring. Nothing, I said. Go on. Stopped inquiringly. I waited outside for ages, but they didn't come out. Last I went in, Sir Eustace, there was no one in the shop. There must be another way out. I stared at him. As I was saying, I came back to the hotel and made some inquiries about Miss Pettigrew. Paget lowered his voice and breathed hard, as he always does when he wants to be confidential. Sir Eustace, a man was seen coming out of her room last night. I raised my eyebrows. I always regarded her as a lady of such eminent respectability, I murmured. Paget went on without heeding. I went straight up and searched her room. What do you think I found? I shook my head. This! Paget held up a safety razor and a stick of shaving soap. What should a woman want with these? I don't suppose Paget ever reads the advertisements in the high-class ladies' papers. I do. Whilst not proposing to argue with him on the subject, I refuse to accept the presence of the razor as proof positive of Miss Pettigrew's sex. Paget is so hopelessly behind the times. I should not have been at all surprised if he had produced a cigarette case to support his theory. However, even Paget has his limits. You're not convinced, Sir Eustace. What do you say to this? I inspected the article, which he dangled aloft triumphantly. It looks like hair, I remarked distastefully. It is hair. I think it's what they call a toupee. Indeed, I commented. Now are you convinced that Miss Pettigrew, that Pettigrew woman is a man in disguise? Really, my dear Paget, I think I am. I might have known it by her feet. Then that's it. And now, Sir Eustace, I want to speak to you about my private affairs. I cannot doubt from your hints and your continual allusions to the time I was in Florence that you have found me out. At last the mystery of what Paget did in Florence is going to be revealed. Make a clean breast of it, my dear fellow, I said kindly, much the best way. Thank you, Sir Eustace. Is it her husband? Annoying fellows' husbands, always turning up when they're least expected. I fail to follow you, Sir Eustace. Whose husband? The lady's husband. What lady? God bless my soul, Paget. The lady you met in Florence. There must have been a lady. Don't tell me that you merely robbed a church or stabbed an Italian in the back because you didn't like his face. I'm quite at a loss to understand you, Sir Eustace. I suppose you are joking? I am an amusing fellow sometimes when I take the trouble, but I can assure you that I am not trying to be funny this minute. I hoped that I hoped that as I was a good way off, you would not recognize me, Sir Eustace. Recognized you where? At Marlow, Sir Eustace. At Marlow? What the devil were you doing at Marlow? I thought you understood that. I'm beginning to understand less and less. Go back to the beginning of the story and start again. You went to Florence. Then you don't know after all, and you didn't recognize me. As far as I can judge, you seem to have given yourself away needlessly, made a coward of by your conscience. But I shall be able to tell better when I've heard the whole story. Now, then, take a deep breath and start over. You went to Florence, but I didn't go to Florence. That is just it. Well, where did you go then? I went home. To Marlow. What the devil did you want to go to Marlow for? I wanted to see my wife. She was in delicate health and expecting. Your wife? I didn't know you were married. No, Sir Eustace. That is just what I am telling you. I deceived you in this manner. How long have you been married? Just over 8 years? I had been married just 6 months when I became your secretary. I did not want to lose the post. Resident secretary is not supposed to have a wife, so I suppressed the fact. You take my breath away, I remarked. Where has she been all these years? We have had a small bungalow on the river at Marlow, quite close to the mill house, for over 5 years. God bless my soul, I muttered. Any children? 4 children, Sir Eustace. I gazed at him in a kind of stupor. I might have known all along that a man like Paget couldn't have a guilty secret. The respectability of Paget has always been my bane. That's just the kind of secret he would have, a wife and 4 children. Have you told this to anyone else? I demanded at last, when I had gazed at him in fascinated interest for quite a long time. Only Miss Bedingfeld. She came to the station at Kimberley. I continued to stare at him. He fidgeted under my gaze. I hope, Sir Eustace, that you are not seriously annoyed? My dear fellow, I said, I don't mind telling you here and now that you've blinked well torn it. I went out seriously ruffled. As I passed the corner curio shop, I was assailed by a sudden irresistible temptation and went in. The proprietor came forward, obsequiously rubbing his hands. Can I show you something? Furs? Curios? I want something quite out of the ordinary, I said. It's for a special occasion. Will you show me what you've got? Perhaps you will come into the back room? We have many specialties there. That is where I made a mistake, and I thought I was going to be so clever. I followed him through the swinging portieres. Chapter 32. Anne's narrative resumed. I had great trouble with Suzanne. She argued, she pleaded, she even wept before she would let me carry out my plan. But in the end I got my own way. She promised to carry out my instructions to the letter, and came down to the station to bid me a tearful farewell. I arrived at my destination the following morning, early. I was met by a short, black-bearded Dutchman whom I had never seen before. He had a car waiting, and we drove off. There was a queer booming in the distance, and I asked him what it was. Guns, he answered laconically. So there was fighting going on in Joburg. I gathered that our objective was a spot somewhere in the suburbs of the city. We turned and twisted and made several detours to get there, and every minute the guns were nearer. It was an exciting time, and every minute at the time we stopped before a somewhat ramshackle. At last, we stopped before a somewhat ramshackle building. The door was opened by a Kaffir boy. My guide signed to me to enter. I stood irresolutely in the dingy square hall. The man passed me and threw open a door. The young lady to see Mr. Harry Rayburn, he said, and laughed. Thus announced, I passed in. The room was sparsely furnished and smelt of cheap tobacco smoke. Behind a desk a man sat writing. He looked up and raised his eyebrows. Dear me, he said, if it isn't Miss Bedingfeld. I must be seeing double, I apologized. Is it Mr. Chichester, or is it Miss Pettigrew? There is an extraordinary resemblance to both of them. Both characters are in abeyance for the moment. I have doffed my petticoats, and my cloth likewise. Won't you sit down?" I accepted a seat composedly. "It would seem," I remarked, "that I have come to the wrong address." "From your point of view, I am afraid you have. Really, Miss Bedingfeld, to fall into the trap a second time!" "It was not very bright of me," I admitted meekly. Something about my manner seemed to puzzle him. "You hardly seem upset by the occurrence," he remarked dryly. "Would my going into heroics have any effect upon it?" I asked. "It certainly would not. My great-aunt Jane always used to say that a true lady was neither shocked nor surprised at anything that might happen," I murmured demurely. "I endeavor to live up to her precepts." I read Mr. Chichester Pettigrew's opinion so plainly written on his face that I hastened into speech once more. "You really are positively marvelous at make-up," I said generously. "All the time you were Miss Pettigrew, I never recognized you, even when you broke your pencil on the shock of seeing me climb upon the train at Cape Town." I tapped upon the desk with the pencil he was holding. He tapped upon his desk with the pencil he was holding in his hand at the minute. "Oh, this is very well in its way, but we must get to business. Perhaps, Miss Bedingfeld, you can guess why we required your presence here." "You will excuse me," I said, "but I never do business with anyone but principals." I had read the phrase of something like it in a money-lender's circular, and I was rather pleased with it. It certainly had a devastating effect upon Mr. Chichester Pettigrew. He opened his mouth and then shut it again. I beamed upon him. "My great-uncle George's maxim," I added, as an afterthought. "Great-aunt Jane's husband, you know. He made knobs for brass beds." I doubt if Chichester Pettigrew had ever been ragged before. He didn't like it at all. "I think you would be wise to alter your tone, young lady." I did not reply, but yawned, a delicate little yawn that hinted at intense boredom. "What the devil," he began forcibly. I interrupted him. "I can assure you that it's no good shouting at me. You are only wasting time here. I have no intention of talking with underlings. You will save a lot of time by annoyance by taking me straight to Sir Eustace Pedlar. Toot!" He looked dumbfounded. "Yes," I said, "Sir Eustace Pedlar." Excuse me?" He bolted from the room like a rabbit. I took advantage of the respite to open my bag and powder my nose thoroughly. Also, I settled my hat in a more becoming angle. Then I settled myself to wait with patience for my enemy's return. He appeared in a subtly chastened mood. "Will you come this way, Miss Bedingfeld?" I followed him up the stairs. He knocked at the door of the room. A brisk "Come in" sounded from inside, and he opened the door and motioned to me to pass inside. Sir Eustace Pedlar sprang up to greet me, genial and smiling. "Well, well, Miss Anne!" He shook me warmly by the hand. "I'm delighted to see you. Come and sit down. Not tired after your journey? That's good." He sat down, facing me, still beaming. It left me rather at a loss. His manner was so completely natural. "Quite right to insist on being brought straight to me," he went on. "Minx is a fool, clever actor, but a fool. That was Minx you saw downstairs." "Oh, really?" I said feebly. "And now," said Sir Eustace cheerfully, "let's get down to facts. How long have you known that I was the Colonel?" "Ever since Mr. Paget told me that he had seen you in Marlow when you were supposed to be in Cannes." Sir Eustace nodded ruefully. "Yes, I told the fool he'd blinking well torn it. He didn't understand, of course. His whole mind was set on whether I'd recognized him. It never occurred to him to wonder what I was doing down there. A piece of sheer bad luck that was. I arranged it all so carefully, too, sending him off to Florence, telling the hotel I was going over to Nice for one night or possibly two. Then, by the time the murder was discovered, I was back again in Cannes with nobody dreaming that I'd ever left the Riviera." He still spoke quite naturally and unaffectedly. I had to pinch myself to understand that this was all real, that the man in front of me was really that deep-dyed criminal, the Colonel. I followed things out in my mind. "Then it was you who tried to throw me overboard on the Kilmorton," I said slowly. "It was you that Paget followed up on the deck that night." He shrugged his shoulders. "I apologize, my dear child, I really do. I always liked you, but you were so confoundedly interfering. I couldn't have all my plans brought to naught by a chit of a girl." "I think your plan at the falls was really the cleverest," I said, endeavoring to look at the thing in a detached fashion. "I would have been ready to swear anywhere that you were in the hotel when I went out. Seeing is believing in future. Yes, Minx had one of his greatest successes as Miss Pettigrew, and he can imitate my voice quite creditably. There's one thing I should like to know." "Yes?" "How did you induce Paget to engage her?" "Oh, that was quite simple. She met Paget in the doorway of the Trade Commissioner's office, or the Chamber of Mines, or whatever it was. He went. Told him I had phoned down in a hurry, and that she had been selected by the government department in question. Paget followed it like a lamb." "You're very frank," I said, studying him. "There's no earthly reason why I shouldn't be." I didn't like the sound of that. I hastened to put my own interpretation to it. "You believe in the success of this revolution? You've burnt your boats." "For an otherwise intelligent young woman, that's a singularly unintelligent remark. No, my dear child, I do not believe in this revolution. I gave it a couple of days longer, and it will fizzle out ignominiously." "Not one of your successes, in fact," I said nastily. "Like all women, you've no idea of business. The job I took on was to supply certain explosives and arms, heavily paid for, to foment feeling generally, and to incriminate certain people up to the hilt. I've carried out my contract with complete success, and I was careful to be paid in advance. I took special care over the whole thing, as I intended it to be my last contract before retiring from business. As for burning my boats, as you call it, I simply don't know what you mean. I'm not the rebel chief or anything of that kind. I'm a distinguished English visitor who had the misfortune of to go nosing into a certain curio shop, and saw a little more than he was meant to, and so the poor fellow was kidnapped. Tomorrow or the day after, when circumstances permit, I shall be found tied up somewhere in a pitiable state of terror and starvation." "Oh," I said slowly, "but what about me?" "That's just it," said Sir Eustace softly. "What about you? I've got you here. I don't want to rub it in any way. But I've got you here very neatly. The question is, what am I going to do with you? The simplest way of disposing of you, and I may add the pleasantest to myself, is the way of marriage. Wives can accuse their husbands, you know, and I'd rather like can't accuse their husbands, you know, and I'd rather like a pretty young wife to hold my hand and glance at me out of liquid eyes. Don't flash them at me so. You quite frighten me. I see that the plan does not commend itself to you." "It does not." Sir Eustace sighed. "A pity, but I am no Adelphi villain. The usual trouble, I suppose. You love another, as the books say. I love another." "I thought as much. First I thought it was that long-legged, pompous-ass Race, but I suppose it's the young hero who fishes you out of the falls that night. Women have no taste. Neither of those two have half the brains that I have. I'm such an easy person to underestimate." I think he was right about that, although I knew well enough the kind of man he was and must be. I could not bring myself to realize it. He had tried to kill me on more than one occasion. He had actually killed another woman
And he was responsible for endless other deeds of which I knew nothing, and yet I was quite unable to bring myself into the frame of mind for appreciating his deeds as they deserved. I could not think of him as other than our amusing, genial traveling companion. I could not even feel frightened of him, and yet I knew he was capable of having me murdered in cold blood as if it struck him was necessary. Yeah. The only parallel I can think of is the case of Stevenson's Long John Silver. He must have been made the same kind of man. Well, well, said his extraordinary person, leaning back in his chair. It's a pity that the idea of being a lady peddler doesn't appeal to you. The other alternatives are rather crude. I felt a nasty feeling going up and down my spine. Of course, I had known all along that I was taking a big risk, but the prize had seemed worth it. Would things turn out as I had calculated, or would they not? The fact of the matter is, Sir Eustace was continuing, I've a weakness for you. I really don't want to proceed to extremes. Suppose you tell me the whole story from the very beginning, and let's see what we can make of it. But no romancing, mind. I want the truth. I was not going to make any mistake over that. I had a great deal of respect for Sir Eustace's shrewdness. It was a moment for the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I told him the whole story, omitting nothing, up to the moment of my rescue by Harry. When I had finished, he nodded his head in approval. Wise girl. You've made a clean breast of the thing, and let me tell you, I should soon have caught you out if you hadn't. A lot of people wouldn't believe your story anyway, especially the beginning part, but I do. You're the kind of girl who would start off like that, at a moment's notice on the slenderest of motives. You've had amazing luck, of course, but sooner or later the amateur runs up against the professional, and then the result is a foregone conclusion. I am the professional. I started on this business when I was quite a youngster. All things considered, it seemed to me a good way of getting rich quickly. I always could think things out and devise ingenious schemes, and I never made the mistake of trying to carry out my schemes myself. Always employ the expert. That has been my motto. The one time I departed from it, I came to grief, but I couldn't trust anyone to do that job for me. Nadina knew too much. I'm an easy-going man, kind-hearted and good-tempered, so long as I'm not thwarted. Nadina both thwarted me and threatened me, just as I was at the apex of a successful career. Once she was dead and the diamonds were in my possession, I was safe. I've come to the conclusion now that I bungled the job. That idiot Paget and his wife and family, my fault. It tickled my sense of humor to employ the fellow, with his, cinquecento poisoner's face, and his mid-Victorian soul. A maxim for you, my dear Anne. Don't let your sense of humor carry you away. For years I've had an instinct that it would be wise to get rid of Paget, but the fellow was so hard-working and conscientious that I honestly couldn't find an excuse for sacking him. So I let things drift. But we're wandering off the point. The question is what to do with you. Your narrative was admirably clear, but there is one thing that still escapes me. Where are the diamonds now? Harry Rayburn has them, I said, watching him. His face did not change. It retained its expression of sardonic good humor. I want those diamonds. I don't see much chance of your getting them, I replied. Don't you? Now I do. I don't want to be unpleasant, but I should like you to reflect that a dead girl or so found in the quarter of the city will occasion no surprise. There's a man downstairs who does those sorts of jobs very neatly. Now you're a sensible young woman. What I propose is this. You will sit down and write to Harry Rayburn, telling him to join you here and bring the diamonds with him. I won't do anything of the kind. Don't interrupt your elders. I propose to make a bargain with you, the diamonds in exchange for your life, and don't make any mistakes about it.
Your life is absolutely in my power.
And Harry?
I'm far too tender-hearted to part two young lovers. He shall go free too, on the understanding, of course, that neither of you interfere with me in the future.
And what guarantee have I that you will keep your side of the bargain?
None whatever, my dear girl. You'll have to trust me and hope for the best. Of course, if you're in an heroic mood and prefer annihilation, that's another matter. This is what I had been playing for. I was careful not to jump at the bait. Gradually, I allowed myself to be bullied and cajoled into yielding. I wrote at Sir Eustace's dictation, Dear Harry, I think I see a chance of establishing your innocence beyond any possible doubt. Please follow my instructions minutely. Go to a Grossato's curio shop. Ask to see something out of the ordinary for a special occasion. The man will then ask you to come into the back room. Go with him. You will find a messenger who will bring you to me. Do exactly as he tells you. Be sure and bring the diamonds with you. Not a word to anyone. Sir Eustace stopped. I leave the fancy touches to your own imagination, he remarked. But be careful to make no mistakes. Yours for ever and ever, Anne, will be sufficient, I remarked. I wrote in the words. Sir Eustace stretched out his hand for the letter and read it through. It seems all right. Now the address. I gave it to him. It was that of a small shop which received letters and telegrams for a consideration. He struck the bell upon the table with his hand. Chichester Pettigrew, alias Minx, answered the summons. This letter is to go immediately, the usual route. Very well, Colonel. He looked at the name on the envelope. Sir Eustace was watching him keenly. Friend of yours, I think? Of mine? The man seemed startled. You had a prolonged conversation with him in Johannesburg yesterday. The man came up to me and questioned me about your movements and those of Colonel Race. I gave him misleading information. Excellent, my dear fellow, excellent, said Sir Eustace genially. My mistake. I chanced to look at Chichester Pettigrew as he left the room. He was white to the lips, as though in deadly terror. No sooner was he outside than Sir Eustace picked up a speaking tube that rested by his elbow and spoke down it. That you, Schwartz? Watch Minx. He's not to leave the house without orders. He put the speaking tube down again and frowned, slightly tapping the table with his hand. May I ask you a question, Sir Eustace? I said after a minute or two of silence. Certainly. What excellent nerves you have, Anne. You are capable of taking an intelligent interest in things when most girls would be sniffling and wringing their hands. Why did you take Harry as your secretary instead of giving him up to the police? I wanted those cursed diamonds. Nadina, the little devil, was playing off your Harry against me. Unless I gave her the price she wanted, she threatened to sell them back to me. That was another mistake I made. I thought she'd have them with her that day, but she was too clever for that. Carton, her husband, was dead too. I'd no clue whatsoever as to where the diamonds were hidden. Then I managed to get a copy of a wireless message sent to Nadina by someone on board the Kilmorden, either Carton or Rayburn. I didn't know which. It was a duplicate of that piece of paper you picked up. 17-122. It ran. I took it to be an appointment with Rayburn, and when he was so desperate to get aboard the Kilmorden, I was convinced that I was right. So I pretended to swallow his statements and let him come. I kept a pretty sharp watch about him and hoped that I should learn more. Then I found Minx trying to play a lone hand and interfering with me. I soon stopped that. He came to heel all right. It was annoying not getting cabin 17, and it worried me not being able to place you. Were you the innocent young girl you seemed, or were you not? When Rayburn set out to keep the appointment that night, Minx was told off to intercept him. Minx muffed it, of course. But why did the wireless message say 17 instead of 71. I thought that out. Carton must have given that wireless operator his own memorandum to copy out to the form, and he never read the copy through. The operator made the same mistake we all did, and read it as 17-122 instead of 171-22. The thing I don't know is how Minx got on to cabin 17. It must have been sheer instinct. And the dispatch to General Smuts? Who tampered with that? My dear Anne, you don't suppose I was going to have a lot of my plans given away without making an effort to save them? With an escaped murderer as a secretary, I had no hesitation whatsoever in substituting blanks. Nobody would think of suspecting dear old Peddler. What about Colonel Race? Oh, yes, that was a nasty jar. When Paget told me he was a Secret Service fellow, I had an unpleasant feeling down the spine. I remembered that he'd been nosing around Nedina in Paris during the war, and I had a horrible suspicion that he was out after me. I don't like the way he's stuck to me ever since. He's one of those strong, silent men who have always got something up their sleeve. A whistle sounded. Sir Eustace picked up the tube, listened for a minute or two, then answered. "Very well, I'll see him now." "Business," he remarked. "Miss Anne, let me show you to your room." He ushered me into a small, shabby apartment. A Kaffir boy brought up my small suitcase, and Sir Eustace urged me to ask for anything I wanted, withdrew the picture of a courteous host. A can of hot water was at the washstand, and I proceeded to unpack a few necessities. Something hard and unfamiliar in my sponge bag puzzled me greatly. I untied the string and looked inside. To my utter amazement, I drew out a small, pearl-handled revolver. It hadn't been there when I started for Kimberley. I examined the thing gingerly. It appeared to be loaded. I handled it with a comfortable feeling. It was a useful thing to have in a house such as this, but modern clothes are quite unsuited to the carrying of firearms. In the end, I pushed it gingerly into the top of my stocking. It made a terrible bulge, and I expected every minute that it would go off and shoot me in the leg, but it really seemed the only place. Chapter 33. I was not summoned to Sir Eustace's presence until late in the afternoon. 11 o'clock tea and a substantial lunch had been served to me in my own apartment, and I felt fortified for further conflict. Sir Eustace was alone. He was walking up and down the room. There was a gleam in his eye, and a restlessness in his manner which did not escape me. He was exultant about something. There was a subtle change in his manner towards me. "I've news for you. Your young man is on his way. You will be here in a few minutes. Moderate your transports. I have something more to say. You attempted to deceive me this morning. I warned you that you would be wise to stick to the truth, and up to a certain point you obeyed me. Then you ran off the rails. You attempted to make me believe that the diamonds were in Harry Rayburn's possession. At the time, I accepted your statement because it facilitated my task, the task of inducing you to decoy Harry Rayburn here. But, my dear Anne, the diamonds have been in my possession ever since I left the Falls, though I only discovered the fact yesterday." "You know," I gasped. "It may interest you to hear that it was Paget who gave the show away. He insisted on boring me with a long, pointless story about a wager and a tin of films. It didn't take me long to put two and two together. Mrs. Blair's distrust of Colonel Race, her agitation, her entreaty that I would take care of her souvenirs for her. The excellent Paget had already unfastened the cases through an excess of zeal. Before leaving the hotel, I simply transferred all the rolls of film to my own pocket. They are in the corner there. I admit that I haven't had time to examine them yet, but I noticed that one of them is totally different weight to the others. rattles in a particular fashion, and has evidently been struck down with secotine, which will necessitate the use of a tin opener. The case seems clear, does it not? You see, I have you both nicely in the trap. It's a pity that you didn't take kindly to the idea of becoming Lady Peddler." I did not answer. I stood looking at him. There was a sound of feet on the stairs. The door was flung open, and Harry Rayburn was hustled into the room between two men. Sir Eustace flung me a look of triumph. "According to plan," he said softly. "You amateurs will pit yourself against professionals." "What's the meaning of this?" cried Harry hoarsely. "Means that you have walked into my parlour," said the spider to the fly, remarked Sir Eustace facetiously. "My dear Rayburn, you are extraordinarily unlucky. You said I could come safely, Anne. Do not reproach her, my dear fellow. That note was written to my dictation, and the lady could not help herself. She would have been wiser not to write it, but I did not tell her so at the time. You followed her instructions, went to the curio shop, were taken through the secret passage from the back room, and found yourself in the hands of your enemies." Harry looked at me. I understood his glance and edged nearer to Sir Eustace. "Yes," murmured the latter. "Decidedly you were not lucky. This is, the third encounter." "Right," said Harry. "This is the third encounter. Twice you have worsted me. Have you ever heard that the third time the luck changes? This is my round. Cover him, man!" I was all ready. In a flash I had whipped the pistol out of my stocking and was holding it to his head. The two men guarding Harry sprang forward, but his voice stopped them. "Another step and he dies. And if they come any closer, Anne, pull the trigger. Don't hesitate." "I shan't," I said cheerfully. "I'm rather afraid of pulling it anyway." I think Sir Eustace shared my fears. He was certainly shaking like a jelly. "Stay where you are," he commanded, and the men stopped obediently. "Tell them to leave the room," said Harry. Sir Eustace gave the order. The men filed out, and Harry shot the bolt across the door behind them. "Now we can talk," he observed grimly, and coming across the room, he took the revolver out of my hand. Sir Eustace uttered a sigh of relief and wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. "I am shockingly out of condition," he observed. "I think I must have a weak heart. I am glad that revolver is in competent hands. I didn't trust Miss Anne with it. Well, my young friend, as you say, now we can talk. I'm willing to admit that you stole a march upon me. Where the devil that revolver came from, I don't know. I had the girl's luggage searched when she arrived. And where did you produce it from? You hadn't got it on a minute ago." "Yes, I had," I replied. "It was in my stocking." "I don't know enough about women. I ought to have studied them more," said Sir Eustace sadly. "I wonder if Paget would have known that." Harry rapped sharply on the table. "Don't play the fool! If it weren't for your grey hairs, I'd throw you out of the window, you damned scoundrel! Grey hairs or no grey hairs, He advanced a step or two, and Sir Eustace skipped nimbly behind the table. "The young are always so violent," he said reproachfully. "Unable to use their brains, they rely solely on their muscles. Let us talk sense. For the moment you have the upper hand, but that state of affairs cannot continue. The house is full of my men. You are hopelessly outnumbered. Your momentary ascendancy has been gained by an accident. Has it?" Something in Harry's voice, a grim raillery, seemed to attract Sir Eustace's attention. He stared at him. "Has it?" said Harry again. "Sit down, Sir Eustace, and listen to what I have to say." Still covering him with the revolver, he went on. "Cards are against you in this one. To begin with, listen to that." That was a dull banging at the door below. There were shouts, oaths, and then a sound of firing. Sir Eustace paled. "What's that?" "Race and his people. You didn't know, did you, Sir Eustace, that Anne had an arrangement with me by which we should know whether communication from one to the other were genuine. Telegrams were to be signed Andy.
letters were to have the word Anne crossed out somewhere in them. Anne knew that your telegram was a fake. She came here of her own free will, walked deliberately into the snare, in the hopes that she might catch you in your own trap. Before leaving Kimberley, she wired both to me and to Race. Mrs. Blair has been in communication with us ever since. I received the letter written at your dictation, which was just what I expected. I had already discussed the probabilities of a secret passage leading out of the curio shop with Race, and he had discovered the place where the exit was situated. There was a screaming, tearing sound and a heavy explosion which shook the room. "They're shelling this part of the town. I must get you out of here, Anne." A bright light flared up. The house opposite was on fire. Sir Eustace had risen and was pacing up and down. Harry kept him covered with a revolver. "So you see, Sir Eustace, the game is up. It was you yourself who very kindly provided us with the clue of your whereabouts. Race's men were watching the exit of the secret passage. In spite of the precautions you took, they were successful in following me here." Sir Eustace turned suddenly. "Very clever, very creditable, but I've still a word to say. If I've lost the trick, so have you. You'll never be able to bring the murder of Nadina home to me. I was in Marlow on that day. That's all you've got against me. No one can prove that I even knew the woman, but you knew her. You had a motive for killing her, and your record's against you. You're a thief, remember, a thief. There's one thing you don't know, perhaps. I've got the diamonds, and here goes." With an incredibly swift movement, he stooped, swung up his arm, and threw. There was a tinkle of breaking glass as the object went through the window and disappeared into the blazing mass opposite. "There goes your only hope of establishing your innocence over the Kimberley affair, and now we'll talk. I'll drive a bargain with you. You've got me cornered. Race will find all he needs in this house. There's a chance for me if I can get away. I'm done for if I stay, but so are you, young man. There's a skylight in the next room. A couple of minutes start and I shall be all right. I've got one or two little arrangements already made. You let me out of the way, and give me a start, and I leave you a signed confession that I killed Nadina." "Yes, Harry," I cried. "Yes, yes, yes!" He turned a stern face on me. "No, Anne, 1,000 times no! You don't know what you're saying." "I do! It solves everything!" "I'd never be able to look at Race in the face again. I'll take my chance, but I'm damned if I let this slippery old fox get away. It's no good, Anne. I won't do it." Sir Eustace chuckled. He accepted defeat without the least emotion. "Well, well," he remarked, "you seem to have met your master, Anne. But I can assure you both that moral rectitude does not always pay." There was a crash of rending wood, and footsteps surged up the stairs. Harry drew back the bolt. Colonel Race was the first to enter the room, his face lit at the sight of us. "You're safe, Anne. I was afraid." He turned to Sir Eustace. "I've been after you for a long time, peddler, and at last I've got you." "Everybody seems to have gone completely mad," declared Sir Eustace airily. "These young people have been threatening me with revolvers and accusing me of the most shocking things. I don't know what it's all about. Don't you? It means that I've found the colonel. It means that on January 8th, the last you were not at Cannes, but at Marlow. It means that when your tool, Madame Nadina, turned against you, you planned to do away with her, and at last we shall be able to bring the crime home to you." "Indeed? And from whom did you get all this interesting information?" "From the man who is even now being looked for by the police. His evidence will be very valuable." "We have other evidence. There is someone else who knew that Nadina was going to meet you at the mill house." Sir Eustace looked surprised. Colonel Race made a gesture with his hand. Arthur Minks, alias the Reverend Edward Chichester, alias Miss Pettigrew, stepped forward. He was pale and nervous, but he spoke clearly enough. "I saw Nadina in Paris the night before she went over to England. I was posing at the time as a Russian count. She told me of her purpose.
I warned her, knowing what kind of man she had to deal with, but she did not take my advice. There was a wireless message on the table. I read it. Afterwards, I thought I would have to try for the diamonds myself. In Johannesburg, Mr. Rayburn accosted me. He persuaded me to come over to his side. Sir Eustace looked at him. He said nothing, but Minx seemed visibly to wilt. Rats always leave a sinking ship, observed Sir Eustace. I don't care for rats. Sooner or later I destroy vermin. That's just one thing I'd like to tell you, Sir Eustace, I remarked. That tin you threw out the window didn't contain the diamonds. It was common pebbles in it. Diamonds are in a perfectly safe place. As a matter of fact, they're in the big giraffe's stomach. Suzanne hollowed it out, put the diamonds in with cotton wool so that they wouldn't rattle, and plugged it up again. Sir Eustace looked at me for some time. His reply was characteristic. I always did hate that blinking giraffe, he said. It must have been instinct. Chapter 34. We were not able to return to Johannesburg that night. The shells were coming over pretty fast, and I gathered that we were now more or less cut off, owing to the rebels having obtained possession of a new part of the suburbs. Our place of refuge was a farm some 20 miles or so from Johannesburg, right out on the veld. I was dropping with fatigue. All the excitement and anxiety of the last 2 days had left me little better than a limp rag. I kept repeating to myself, without being able to believe it, that our troubles were really over. Harry and I were together, and we should never be separated again, yet all through I was part conscious of some barrier between us, a constraint on his part, the reason of which I could not fathom. Sir Eustace had been driven off in an opposite direction, accompanied by a strong guard. He waved his hand airily to us on departing. I came out onto the stoep early on the following morning, and looked across the veld in the direction of Johannesburg. I could see the great dumps glistening in the pale morning sunshine, and I could hear the low rumbling mutter of the guns. The revolution was not over yet. The farmer's wife came out and called me in for breakfast. She was a kind, motherly soul, and I was already very fond of her. Harry had gone out at dawn, and had not yet returned, so she informed me. Again I felt a stir of uneasiness pass over me. What was this shadow of which I was so conscious between us? After breakfast I sat out on the stoep, a book in my hands, which I did not read. I was so lost in my own thoughts that I never saw Colonel Race ride up and dismount from his horse. It was not until he said, "Good morning, Anne," that I became aware of his presence. "Oh," I said with a flush, "it's you." "Yes. May I sit down?" He drew a chair up beside me. It was the first time we had been together alone since that day at the Matapos. As always, I felt that curious mixture of fascination and fear that he never failed to inspire in me. "What is the news?" I asked. "Smuts will be in Johannesburg tomorrow. I give this outbreak 3 days more before it collapses utterly. In the meantime, the fighting goes on." "I wish," I said, "that one could be sure that the right people were the ones to get killed. I mean, the ones who wanted to fight, not just all the poor people who happen to live in the parts where the fighting is going on." He nodded. "I know what you mean, Anne. That's the unfairness of war. But I've other news for you." "Yes?" "A confession of incompetency on my part. Pedler has managed to escape." "What?" "Yes. No one knows how he managed it. He was securely locked up for the night in an upper-story room of one of the farm roundabouts which the military has taken over, but this morning the room was empty and the bird has flown." Secretly I was rather pleased. Never to this day have I been able to rid myself of a sneaking fondness for Sir Eustace. I dare say it reprehensible, but there it is. I admired him. He was a thoroughgoing villain, I dare say, but he was a pleasant one. You never met anyone half so amusing since." I concealed my feelings, of course. Naturally, Colonel Race would feel quite differently about it. He wanted Sir Eustace brought to justice. There was nothing very surprising in this escape, when one came to think of it. All round Joburg he must have innumerable spies and agents, and whatever Colonel Race might think, I was exceedingly doubtful that they would ever catch him. He probably had a well-planned line of retreat. Indeed, he had said as much to us. I expressed myself suitably, though in a rather lukewarm manner, and the conversation languished. Then Colonel Race asked suddenly for Harry. I told him that he had gone off at dawn and that I hadn't seen him this morning. "You understand, don't you, Anne, that, apart from formalities, he is completely cleared? There are technicalities, of course, but Sir Eustace's guilt is well assured. There's nothing now to keep you apart." He said this without looking at me, in a slow, jerky voice. "I understand," I said gratefully. "And there is no reason why he should not at once resume his real name." "No, of course not." "You know his real name?" The question surprised me. "Of course I do. Harry Lucas." He did not answer, and something in the quality of his silence struck me as peculiar. "And do you remember that as we drove home from the Matterpost that day, I told you that I knew what I had to do?" "Of course I remember." "I think that I may fairly say I have done it. The man you love is cleared of suspicion." "Was that what you meant?" "Of course." I hung my head, ashamed of the baseless suspicion I had entertained. He spoke again in a thoughtful voice. "When I was a mere youngster, I was in love with a girl who jilted me. After that I thought only of my work. My career meant everything to me. Then I met you, Anne, and all that seemed worth nothing. But youth calls to youth. I've still got my work." I was silent. I suppose one can't really love two men at once. But you can feel like it. The magnetism of this man was very great. I looked up at him suddenly. "I think that you'll go very far," I said dreamily. "I think that you've got a great career ahead of you. You'll be one of the world's big men." I felt as though I was uttering a prophecy. "I shall be alone, though. All the people who do really big things are." "You think so?" "I'm sure of it." He took my hand and said in a low voice, "I'd rather have had the other." Then Harry came striding round the corner of the house. Colonel Race rose. "Good morning, Lucas," he said. For some reason, Harry flushed up to the roots of his hair. "Yes," I said gaily, "you must be known by your real name now." But Harry was still staring at Colonel Race. "So you know, sir," he said at last. "I never forget a face. I saw you once as a boy." "What's all this about?" I asked, puzzled, looking from one to the other. It seemed a conflict of wills between them. Race won. Harry turned slightly away. "I suppose you're right, sir. Tell her my real name." "And this isn't Harry Lucas. Harry Lucas was killed in the war. This is John Harold Erdsley. Chapter 35. With his last words, Colonel Race had swung away and left us. I stood staring at him. Harry's voice recalled me to myself. "Anne, forgive me. Say you forgive me." He took my hand in his, and almost mechanically I drew it away. "Why did you deceive me?" "I don't know that I can make you understand. I was afraid of all that sort of thing, the power and fascination of wealth. I wanted you to care for me just for myself, for the man I was, without ornaments and trappings." "You mean you didn't trust me?" "You can put it that way if you like, but it isn't quite true. I'd become embittered, suspicious, always prone to look for ulterior motives, and it was so wonderful to be cared for in the way you cared for me." "I see," I said slowly. I was going over in my own mind the story he had told me. For the first time I noticed discrepancies in which I had disregarded. An assurance of money, the power to buy back the diamonds of Nadina, the way in which he had referred to speak of both men from the point of view of an outsider, and when he had said, "my friend," he had meant not Erdsley, but Lucas. It was Lucas, the quiet fellow, who had loved Nadina so deeply. "How did it come about?" I asked. "We were both reckless, anxious to get killed. One night we exchanged identification discs, for luck. Lucas was killed the next day, blown to pieces." I shuddered. "Why didn't you tell me now, this morning? You couldn't have doubted my caring for you by this time." "Anne, I didn't want to spoil it all. I wanted to take you back to the island. What's the good of money? It can't buy happiness. We'd have been happy on the island. I tell you, I'm afraid of that other life. It nearly rotted me through once." "Did Sir Eustace know who you really were?" "Oh, yes." "And Carton?" "No, he saw us both with Nadina at Kimberley one night, but he didn't know which was which. He accepted my statement that I was Lucas, and Nadina was deceived by this cable. She was never afraid of Lucas. He was a quiet chap, very deep, but I always had the devil's own temper. She'd have been scared out of her life if she'd known that I'd come back to life again." "Harry, if Colonel Race hadn't told me, what did you mean to do?" "Say nothing. Go on as Lucas." "And your father's millions?" "Race was welcome to them. Anyway, he would make a better use of them than I ever shall." "Anne, what are you thinking about? You're frowning so." "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that I almost wish Colonel Race hadn't made you tell me." "No, he was right. I owed you the truth." He paused, then said suddenly, "You know, Anne, I'm jealous of Race. He loves you too, and he's a bigger man than I am or ever shall be." I turned to him, laughing. "Harry, you idiot. It's you I want, and that's all that matters." As soon as possible, we started for Cape Town. There Suzanne was waiting to greet me, and we disemboweled the big giraffe together. When the revolution was finally quelled, Colonel Race came back to Cape Town, and at his suggestion, the big villa in Muizenberg that had belonged to Sir Lawrence Erdsley was reopened, and we all took up our abode in it. There we made our plans. I was to return to England with Suzanne, and to be married from her house in London, and the trousseau was to be bought in Paris. Suzanne enjoyed planning all these details enormously. So did I, and yet the future seemed curiously unreal. Sometimes, without knowing why, I felt absolutely stifled, as though I couldn't breathe. It was the night before we were to sail. I couldn't sleep. I was miserable, and I didn't know why. I hated leaving Africa. When I came back to it, would it be the same thing? Would it ever be the same thing again? And then I was startled by an authoritative tap on the shutter. I sprang up. Harry was on the stoep outside. "Put some clothes on, Anne, and come out. I want to speak to you." I huddled on a few garments and stepped out into the cool night air, still and scented, with its velvety feel. Harry beckoned me out of earshot of the house. His face looked pale and determined, and his eyes were blazing. "Anne, do you remember saying to me once that women enjoyed doing things they disliked for the sake of someone they liked?" "Yes," I said, wondering what was coming. He caught me in his arms. "Anne, come away with me. Now, tonight. Back to Rhodesia. Back to the island. I can't stand all this tomfoolery. I can't wait for you any longer." I disengaged myself a minute. "And what about my French frocks?" I lamented mockingly. To this day, Harry never knows when I'm in earnest, and when I'm only teasing him. "Damn your French frocks! Do you think I want to put frocks on you? I'm a damn sight more likely to want to tear them off you. I'm not going to let you go. Do you hear? You're my woman. If I let you go away, I may lose you. I'm never sure of you. You're coming with me now, tonight, and damn everybody." He held me to him, kissed me until I could hardly breathe. "I can't do without you any longer, Anne. I can't indeed. I hate all this money. Let Race have it. Come on, let's go." "My toothbrush?" I demurred. "You can buy one. I know I'm a lunatic, but for God's sake, come." He stalked off at a furious pace. I followed him as meekly as Barosti women I have observed at the falls, only I wasn't carrying a frying pan on my head. He walked so fast that it was very difficult to keep up with him. "Harry," I said at last in a meek voice, "are we going to walk all the way to Rhodesia?" He turned suddenly, and with a great shout of laughter gathered me up in his arms. "I'm mad, sweetheart, I know it, but I do love you so. We're a couple of lunatics. Oh, Harry, you never asked me, but I'm not making a sacrifice at all. I wanted to come." Chapter 36. That was 2 years ago. We still live on the island. Before me, on the rough wooden table, is the letter that Suzanne wrote me. "Dear babes in the woods, dear lunatics in love." I'm not surprised, not at all. All the time we've been talking Paris and frocks, I felt that it wasn't a bit real, that you'd vanish into the blue some day to be married over the tongs in the good old gypsy fashion. But you are a couple of lunatics. This idea of renouncing a vast fortune is absurd. Colonel Race wanted to argue the matter, but I have persuaded him to leave the argument to time. I can administer this date for Harry, and none better. Because, after all, honeymoons don't last forever. You're not here, Anne, so I can safely say that without having you fly out at me like a little wildcat. Love in the wilderness will last a good while, but one day you will suddenly begin to dream of houses in Park Lane, sumptuous furs, Paris frocks, the largest thing in motors, and the latest thing in perambulators, French maids, and Norland nurses. Oh, yes, you will. But have your honeymoon, dear lunatics, and let it be a long one, and think of me sometimes, comfortably putting on weight amidst the flesh pots. Your loving friend, Suzanne Blair. P.S. I'm sending you an assortment of frying pans as a wedding present, and an enormous tureen of pâté de foie gras to remind you of me. There was another letter that I sometimes read. It came a good while after the other, and was accompanied by a bulky parcel. It appeared to be written from somewhere in Bolivia. My dear Anne Bedingfeld, I can't resist writing to you, not so much for the pleasure it gives me to write, as for the enormous pleasure I know it will give you to hear from me. Your friend Race wasn't quite as clever as he thought himself, was he? I think I shall appoint you my literary executor. I'm sending you my diary. There's nothing in it that should interest Race and his crowd, but I fancy that there are passages in it which may amuse you. Make use of it in any way you like. I suggest an article for the daily budget. Criminals I have met. I only stipulate that I shall be the central figure. By this time, I have no doubt that you are no longer Anne Bedingfeld, but Lady Erdsley, queening it in Park Lane. I should just like to say that I bear you no malice whatever. It is hard, of course, to have to begin all over again at my time of life, but, entre nous, I had a little reserved fund carefully put aside for such a contingency. It has come in very usefully, and I am getting together a nice little connection. By the way, if you ever come across that funny friend of yours, Arthur Minks, just tell him that I haven't forgotten him, will you? That will give him a nasty jar. On the whole, I think I have displayed a most Christian and forgiving spirit, even to Paget. I happened to hear that he, or rather Mrs. Paget, had brought a sixth child into the world the other day. England will be entirely populated by Pagets soon. I sent the child a silver mug, and on a postcard declared my willingness to act as godfather. I can see Paget taking both mug and postcard straight to Scotland Yard, without a smile on his face. Bless you, Liquid Eyes. Some days you will see what a mistake you have made in not marrying me. Yours ever, Eustace Pedler. Harry was furious. It is the one point on which he and I do not see eye to eye. To him, Sir Eustace was the man who tried to murder me, and whom he regards as responsible for the death of his friend. Sir Eustace's attempts on my life have always puzzled me. They are not in the picture, so to speak, for I am sure that he always had a genuinely kindly feeling toward me. Then why did he twice attempt to take my life? Harry says because he's a damned scoundrel, and seems to think that settles the matter. Suzanne was more discriminating. I talked it over with her, and she puts it down to a fear complex. Suzanne goes in rather for psychoanalysis. She pointed out to me that Sir Eustace's whole life was actuated by a desire to be safe and comfortable. He had an acute sense of self-preservation, and the murder of Nadina removed certain inhibitions. His actions did not represent the state of his feelings towards me, but were the result of his acute fears for his own safety. I think Suzanne is right. As for Nadina, she was the kind of woman who deserved to die. Men do all sorts of questionable things in order to get rich, but women shouldn't pretend to be in love when they aren't for ulterior motives. I can forgive Sir Eustace easily enough, but I shall never forgive Nadina. Never, never, never. The other day I was unpacking some tins that were wrapped in bits of an old daily budget, and I suddenly came upon the words, "The Man in the Brown Suit." How long ago it seemed. I had, of course, severed my connections with the daily budget long ago. I had done with it sooner than it had done with me. My romantic wedding was given a halo of publicity. My son is lying in the sun, kicking his legs. There is a man in a brown suit, if you like. He's wearing as little as possible, which is the best costume for Africa, and is as brown as a berry. He's always burrowing in the earth. I think he takes after Papa. He'll have that same mania for Pleistocene clay. Suzanne sent me a cable when he was born. Congratulations and love to the latest arrival on Lunatic's Island. In his head, is his head dolichocephalic or brachiocephalic? I wasn't going to stand that from Suzanne. I sent her a reply with one word, economical and to the point. Platycephalic. And that concludes The Man in the Brown Suit. So the next Storytime stream will be on Tuesday, 2 to 4, as usual. And don't forget to vote on Discord or Twitter, or both if you want, for which you would like me to read next. I have the 4 options up. Let's see, on the Discord it is in Books and Stories channel, and then on the Twitter, of course, you can see it in my feed, or on my history profile. I don't know what it's called. And then on Wednesday, the next book that we'll be reading for the Older Ages Storytime is The Mysterious Affair at Isles, which is the very first Agatha Christie and introduces probably her most famous character, Poirot. And I just wanted to comment, I think it was last Storytime stream I had mentioned that one of the characters from this book had appeared in one of the movies that they did. That movie was The Death on the Nile, and the character which returned was Colonel Race. So that was fun. Okay, well, I'll see you when you can make it, and no worries. I know that, my schedule doesn't necessarily coincide with other people's schedules. Also, don't forget to vote on when you would like me to start the stream, and that one I think is in general chat. I think it's in general chat. And then I also
No, wait, I don't have that poll up on Twitter. But yeah, on my birthday stream this Friday. Starting time is TBD. Anyways, I'm going to go ahead and end the stream here. Thank you so much for